try that one. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hei aki ana te atakura, hei tio, hei huka, hei hauhunga, ti hei mauri ora.
Thank you, Dave. Right, apologies. What have you got there?
So we have Councillor Mackenzie, Sydney, and Les Wanhala. No apologies.
Great. So I'll move that those apologies be accepted, please. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Is there any extraordinary business to come up from anyone that's not on the agenda or? No, that's good. Confirmation of the minutes. So that meeting was the 23rd of May. So I'll move these minutes to be a true and accurate record of the meeting. Do I have a seconder? Richard, thank you. All in favour? Aye. Carried. Any?
Aye. I've got an amendment.
Hold the carried.
Hold the carry, sorry. We have an amendment. Just towards the end of item 9 on page 7, there's a bullet point, Lake Heron, problem child with runaway algae and highest for any lake in New Zealand. We think that's not quite correct, or it isn't correct, and we'd like to change that to say Lake Heron is of most concern in Otawharakai given the trajectory of algal growth. However, it is not the highest of any lake in New Zealand. So just want to make that amendment if everyone's happy.
So we got inaccurate information?
Yeah. No, I think maybe that was perhaps misquoted or written down. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move that amendment. Anyone in favour? Chris? Second it, sorry, in favour? You're all in favour, thank you. So
thank
Carol,
you.
you'll get a...
I've sent it to Carol. Yeah,
thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Bill.
I think anything else in the minutes will come up during the meeting, so there's nothing else to discuss.
If I could draw attention to my comment back in May around the timeliness of the regional planning, because then it talks to the correspondence in. So I just want to highlight that.
Thanks, Ange. I actually have highlighted that, so we would ask you to talk to that in a minute. Right, so correspondence. So what have we got, Dave?
So there's no outward correspondence. Inward we have the Mid-Canterbury vision. Did you want to talk to that now?
Well, I thought, Ange, you might just explain why it's in the board paper, in the committee's papers, and just a wee bit about it, please.
Thanks, Bill. Yes, so again, if I circle back to the May meeting where we raised the fact that there was this enormous amount of requirement for community consultation around our vision and our freshwater management units, the integrated planning and everything else that's ahead of us, and the timeframes that exist around that is all rather daunting. Having been part of the regional committee discussions, we knew what was coming, but my concern was that there was little to no awareness in the wider general public about what that was and what it was going to require. So then if you go to page 10 and you look at the vision work that's being done by a small group of engaged community leaders, if you like, both from urban and rural, it's been a massive piece of work that's happened across about 4 weeks. Significant collaboration and engagement, 30 odd meetings, over 600 people consulted with, and they were asked to consider what they felt were the strengths of their community and what the challenges were and what they thought success looked like across an approximate 50-year time frame. So that was workshopped, hosted in small halls and lounge rooms across the district and into some urban workplaces. We also shared some of the information. It coincided with the Ashburton District Council doing their early engagement on their long-term plan workshops, and the sections of social, economic, environmental and culture were the same sections that we were looking at with our consultation. So where there was some crossovers with the information, and ADC was very generous in sharing the information that they had. What's in front of you here is obviously the outcome with the vision statement and a few foundations or principles. That's been submitted to Environment Canterbury. It's really encouraging that quite a few submitters from outside our district or industry. They've also submitted and referenced the work that's been done here because I suppose, of the gratitude of the amount of people that have contributed into what this looks like. And then the final component of it for now, given the submissions I think close tomorrow or the next day, is the group has an opportunity to present to the ECAN councillors on the 13th of September. So we would encourage anybody who's interested to come along and support the submitters for that. But I think a debt of gratitude must go in particular to Phil Everest, who led the charge on a lot of this. I do question that this could not have been done in a slightly more timely fashion through the zone committees and regional committees, which was my understanding of what they were set up to do. So that was just a final wee note to self, because it's really increased a lot of workloads quite significantly.
Thanks, Angela. Is there any questions anyone would like to ask Angela about what we have in front of us? Chris?
Yeah, Angela, and I'd like to congratulate the team on the amount of work they've done. But I think we've also got to be cognizant of the fact that this document here is super high level. And if I was to refer it and get it right, I think the Otago Regional Policy Statement is going to be about 700 pages. And for us to effectively thinking about 2 pages, I think we need a lot more meat on the bones. So when you are talking to the council, I think you need to talk about, what is that critical infrastructure, rather than just alluding to it. Actually talk about, we want river protections, we want plans around managed gravel management, we need to focus in on what the things that really are important to us, because expecting someone in ECAN to interpret this and what we're thinking, and with those words there, I think it could be a big bow to draw for them to hit the nail on the head on our behalf. So I think you're going to have to put a bit more, even if there's another round of submissions on it, to get a bit more targeted about what we actually mean as a community. Thank you, and thanks for all the work you've done, and especially to Phil Everest too.
It was just really a comment following on from Angela and Chris's comments. There's been a huge amount of mahi done by the group, which is excellent. You've engaged the community out there, which is good to see. You've had a lot of people turn up, they've given their views. We've had Peter Scott in here at our council meeting on Wednesday, where this was discussed as well. He gave a presentation. As Chris said, this is the high level, this is the start. There's mid-level layers underneath, so this is not the last of it. This is giving the direction, and council gave the direction to Peter that the community needs to be listened to for Ashburton, and Ashburton is different to Christchurch, but one plan does all, so they've got some magic work to do to see that Ashburton is different to Christchurch, is different to Selwyn, etc. So we'll be watching with interest and submitting again and again, so it is got right.
Yeah, just to Chris's point, and he's absolutely right, it is high level. That group is one opportunity to submit. Everybody gets to submit themselves, but my question, I suppose, going forward is from a zone committee perspective. What's our role in ensuring that that critical infrastructure and those discussions, I mean, what's the role of the mayoral forum? What's the role of the zone committee? Outside of this, this community group, there's got to be other mechanisms that we can apply some of that. Is it pressure? Is it understanding? Because it's great that we've done this, but we all have to go back to our day jobs, so we don't want to feel like we're holding the responsibility. I want to know what other opportunities exist to ensure that points like you've raised and many other people have raised aren't being missed.
To answer that, and Peter was here and asking us questions, what are the pathways forward for this plan? So I'd probably recommend that our council meeting of last Wednesday was recorded, get to the piece where Peter talks. He talks about it. This is the first high level. There's more to come that come underneath. But it was also mentioned to him that not to head down a rabbit hole in one area that you can't back out of. He's taken that on board. So listen to that presentation that he gave to council, and hopefully that will answer your questions.
My question was going to be to you, Andrew, what did the group want the zone committee to do? Just table it or just watch it? Or was there, so you've tabled it. Did they expect a recommendation or an action from the zone committee, or did they?
Is it just being received?
Was it just receiving the document?
We weren't, we sent it out to a broad group. And so amongst that broad group, some have chosen to tuck it into their submission or reference it or appendix or something like that. In terms of the zone committee, there weren't any specific requirements. Perhaps as we discuss it here, we look to, what Neil's talked about there. We find ways to stay engaged in the conversation outside of this discrete piece of work. Or suggestions on, what's coming next and how can we get a little bit more ready for it. This was very reactionary. I'd love to be proactive, which was what my point in the minutes back in May was about. And it was actually a point I raised back in September also, because we could see what was coming. We had this enormous amount of work coming towards us and this unshiftable deadline, and it just wasn't never going to match up. So I'd like to be able to think that we can be more proactive and ask those questions.
Neil, if you got
Yeah, I think the zone committee, if you all agree, a letter should be sent to ECAN supporting this document, that it's Mid-Canterbury's vision, and the zone committee supports it, as long as you agree you support it, and you want to be kept up to date with future developments as the plan is progressing, and be involved in it as well. A letter to ECAN would do that.
Chris?
Funny you should mention that, Ian, that, Mr Mayor, I was going to say exactly those things, that it's about that we receive it, and we'd like the community to be involved in putting more meat on the bones of it. But I think it's a really good place to start to tell the regional council that we're in agreement that, I think I don't know of anyone in the zone committee that's not in agreement with what has been put here, that we should actually support what has been put. But it's part one.
Jen, have you got a comment? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, just unmuting. I wouldn't say that I support it 100%. I think it is very business as usual, and it seems to me like not a very far, like not very much different from what the last regional policy statement was saying, and that I thought hasn't been particularly well implemented either. So, yeah, my only thing is that I would find it hard to put my support fully behind that.
If you consider that 620 people were engaged in input into this document and anyone had a chance to express their views, but are you happy that we sent a letter to ECAN just noting that this document was prepared by sectors of the community and just so it's got our backing to be looked at along with the other submissions that they'll be receiving?
Yeah, I mean, I think they know that and recognise that.
Good, okay.
Yeah.
Mr Chairman, does Jen want to say which part she's not happy with of this vision?
Look, I mean, I think what I just said is an overall sort of statement is that I think it is very, I think the work that went into it was amazing. I don't want to take anything away from the community engagement that happened, because I think that was really stunning what went on since that last meeting that we had with Andrew and Cameron there, and talking what we talked about then, about how to engage the community. And I think what happened after that was extraordinary and very well done. I don't want to put a spanner in the works. I feel that this isn't hugely visionary in terms of some of the calls that are being made going forward. But I also understand why that is. But just in thinking what you just said, Chris, about, being more precise about the exact sort of practical infrastructure or whatever, that we're talking about in this, and you talked about river protection and something else along those lines. I'm not sure that would be something that I would be supporting in terms of what we need to be doing for our rivers, and these ideas of giving them more space, or thinking about different ways of working than largely engineering projects. So look, I'm happy for the Zone Committee to write a letter around it, noting the community engagement that went into it. And I certainly defer. I know I'm not a mainstream voice in the community, and I don't expect that to be reflected in there. I'm just trying to put forward what I think.
Jen, if I could just respond to what I actually did say, which was that we have a plan around the management of the rivers for flooding and whatever. That doesn't say that we need flood banks or whatever, but we actually have a plan. I didn't actually quantify, but it actually directs the council that we need to have a community formulated plan about what we're going to do. So I was making sure I wasn't telling anyone what it needs to be. It's just we all need a plan so that district council, regional council, whoever, and the community know that we're going to have a plan engaged in that process. It might look at things in different places, but let's have a plan. So that's where I was coming from on that.
Yeah, I'd fully agree with that. Yeah. So now that you've clarified that for me, I fully agree with that.
Okay, Jim, sorry, Richard.
I'll just put my 2 cents in. I fully support it, because if I read the vision, the first line is quite important to me. It's Mid-Canterbury's intergenerational vision is for a thriving and resilient community. Once you have those, everything else can come from that. So that's what I would see. Your environmental responsible happens, culture, all those things happen from a thriving and resilient community. So that, to me, that's why I like the vision. It's not hard-nosed, one way or the other way. So that's where I just like to put, I fully support us.
We worked really
pushing ahead.
Thanks, Richard. Well, I think thanks for your comments, Jen, and I think we'll write a letter on behalf of the Zone Committee supporting this document and realising that there are other views out there. But Dave and I will draft up one. So do we need a motion for that, or we just?
Yeah,
I think we can move to that effect, basically.
Are you okay with that, Carol, in terms of wording of
Wording for motion, are you okay with what?
Yep, I've got some notes here, I'll tidy it up and put something out.
We're requesting the regional council carry on engaging with the community groups.
Great. Can I have a second to that? Yeah, Richard will second that. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Great, thank you for that, that's good. What's the next bit of?
So the second bit of correspondence is the letter from Willie Lefferink thanking the Zone Committee for our action plan budget funds towards the Carters Creek catchment group. And then we have a letter from Keith Gundry around the flooding issues with Carters Creek. And there's quotations from people and photos as well. we thought we're probably best just to accept these, receive these letters now, and we could talk about the flooding later on when we have the presentation on Carter's Creek and do it all together.
Is there an item where there's an email sent to all the zone committee inviting them to the Tom from such and such on behalf of Forest and Bird about the run of the rivers? Was that is that correspondence or?
Oh, it's not tabled, it's correspondence.
Oh, wasn't? Okay, right.
I see Keith is here, and it's great. You've written a letter, which is good. On the agenda, you've got the fairly well low down, do you think?
Yes.
How long's Brent? How long are you going to be, Brent?
He's got 40 minutes with questions.
Because Keith is running here, and
I think you've got some time pressure, Brett, on
okay.
You need to be away by a certain time, don't you?
Okay, Keith, are you all right? It might be 20 minutes or half an hour. Is that okay? Yeah. Great.
So you'd like to slot them in before the Y connection then? Is that what
We'll
you're
just
saying?
see how we go for time.
Okay.
But Willie, do you want to talk to your letter, or you'll be with Keith? You'll be talking about the flooding. You'll be.
No, the letter is fine. I was just thanking you. We've got work in progress. But,
Yeah.
Particularly want to talk about flooding issues. Yeah.
Okay, appreciate that.
Cool. So we can just receive the
We'll
findings.
receive that. Is that it?
Correspondence, yep.
It's correspondence. Okay. Well, we've got public contribution, but we're going to have that as we go along. And if anyone wants to chip in, feel free to do that. So then it's Brent.
Yep.
And on Peter Lowe, great. So that's page 23, if you're not.
We'll go on here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Zone Committee, for the opportunity to present. I'm very excited about our achievements, and it's good to be able to share them. Brett will start, and I'll field between the two of us, we'll field any questions as we go. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the trust?
First slide up's our trust. HH Wet has got quite a wide skill set and is working, I think, very, very well. We've got trustees Neil in the room, also Fleur. We've got quite a breadth of experience across the community, which is great. I'm very pleased how that is functioning.
So we have a thanks to the Zone Committee before we start to talk about what we've learned. And so you'll be aware, Zone Committee put up some funds for the maintenance of some of our plantings. So in these slides, between them, there are more than 15,000 new natives in the catchment over the last 4 or so years. We've exceeded our 95% survival target. So they're there, and that is because of the maintenance, having the right people do the maintenance and having that funded. So the ones on the right, across the top and the right, they're through their 3-year maintenance period now. One in the middle, that was planted in April of this year, so it's just beginning its journey. So we can hopefully give you confidence that the money you've apportioned for the plants being maintained now will see them survive and thrive like the other ones that are already in play. So I'll come back a little bit more to some of these sites later on, if that's all right. But thank you, it's appreciated. Given time, what we propose to do is to move on through the presentation, please interrupt us if there are questions of clarification on the way, but then hopefully we'll allow a little bit of time for discussion at the end, and there are some words to prompt that too, if that's all right. So what we would like to cover today is a brief update on where we think the freshwater management initiatives in this catchment are at and our contribution towards them. Then secondly, what we're learning, and I've got lots of graphs and I'm just going to focus in on little key bits of learning from them. And then just we want to finish, if you like, stop on the last slide, which is really starting to ask some questions and pose some of our learnings in terms of the next step, the NPS-FM next steps, and how our learnings can feed into that process or support the process. From our perspective, there are 4 work streams, if you like, going on in this space. Number 1, the on-farm improvement, so that's obviously key both now and on into the future to keep improving the way that water and nutrients are managed on farm. The groundwater system needs some help because of the legacy effects of past land use, and so number 2, the managed aquifer recharge is one of the key contributions to that. Just changing things on farm doesn't change what left the farm, the nutrients that left the farm a generation or few ago. That is in the system whether we like it or not. The near river recharge is targeted at the Hikio Hines River at the moment, which is a river that was historically supported through water races. That's irrigation and stock water races, and it's a river with a lot of life in it and a lot of meaning to our local communities, and so the near river recharge is a potential key contribution to the resilience of that river and its future life. The bottom of the catchment, so on to number 3 now. Historically, you'll be aware there were extensive wetland complexes down there. They took in and utilised, transformed nutrients historically that came down through this catchment before current generations of practices. The nutrients were always there. And so we're looking to be able to do that in a 21st century way. How can we add that role back into this catchment without taking any more land that is necessary? So we're looking at that potential lower catchment contribution, which will help again with the life force, the ecosystem health of lower catchment waterways and into the ocean. Number 4, of course, adding this highly valued clean water into this catchment for these purposes. It's really important that that water goes towards the ecosystem health, and so managing the allocation of water being taken out of the system, for example, run-of-river irrigation off the Hikio Hines, it's important that we're not putting water in the top of the river for that water to be taken out further along. So those are the 4 areas that I'm just going to talk through what we've learned. You will recall this, those of you that were around 7 or 8, 10 years ago, and these were the complementary initiatives. So the second line being a potential contributions of water for managed aquifer recharge and near river recharge, peaking at an average of 3.8 cumex in 2025, which is not too far off. We think we can do better than that, and I'll talk about that soon. But also just noting the sort of between the 20 and 25 targets for 20 to 25% reduction target for nitrogen leaching, and down on the bottom line, the potential nitrate concentrations in the shallow aquifer springs around that 9.5 or so milligrams a litre. So I'll just refer back to this when we go through the monitoring, and we're actually, the short answer is we're on target with all of these. It's good news. Again, just some numbers that I'm sure you'll be well familiar with. The current plan change sets numerical targets and years to achieve these by, with the on-farm legacy support and the improved management. Central Freshwater words it in a slightly different way and has different numerical targets. But importantly, I think recognises, under bullet 2, that reversing past damage is a key part of this, which is something which was not, it was targeted in PC2, as you can see under the second bullet point there, but at a national level, noting that, I think, is very important. So again, it's not just what we're doing changing with current practices, it's recognising the effects of past practices is important too. It's really important that both policy and decision making at the community level is supported by evidence. And so you'll see the members on the left-hand side of the screen here. We have collectively formed the Science Collaboration Group. There was some good science done 10 years ago for PC2, but it was only the beginning. And there is a lot more that needs to be done so that decisions in the future are informed by science. And I'll show you with the monitoring we've got to date. We can't start the science once the new policy has been determined. We need a long history of monitoring in science to be able to inform this properly, and this team is doing it. We're also involved through Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, through in the Ashburton District Council Biodiversity Strategy, for example. You'll be hearing other outputs as they come through. Romy's work has been presented in forums of historical data. You may be aware Justin Legg from MHV Water is embarking on a PhD supporting this space, which is really helpful. And one of your own, Sidene, is writing up her master's thesis at the moment. She may not be telling you about this, but her brain is thoroughly exercised at the moment, and it's really important work understanding when you look at water quality in a particular bore, how that water quality has been impacted as it's gone through the catchment, where the nutrients have come from, how long they've been in the system, and things like that. So that's all really important work, and this is leading work too. So again, we're doing well. It came as a bit of a surprise to us, I guess, when we started asking about the catchment level on farm leaching reduction targets and looking for an update at a catchment level of what was going on, and that information that seems to be required through PC2 and now through MPSFM isn't actually available at this point in time at a catchment level. Having said that, there is some information out there, and that information is showing improvements. The big irrigation schemes clearly cover a lot of the catchment in terms of the water and the nutrient use. In the top right-hand corner is one of our Trust's contributions to this area. I think we've talked about it before here. So this is the utilisation of the nutrients coming through groundwater irrigation, where the nutrients are high, that the free nutrient, if you like, coming through the irrigator is an important source of nutrients and a potential win-win, reducing leaching and saving some money for the farmer if that is incorporated into decision making. Some areas it's relatively easy, for example on pasture. In other areas, cropping situations in particular, or multiple irrigation sources, it's more complex. So we're working on support packages for that at the moment. Just in terms of the numbers, we talked about this 20 to 25% target by 2025. And so this is a subset of BCI and MHV water shareholders who were due to be audited in this particular round. And you'll see that the reductions, if you like, in terms of the metrics that are being measured, are suggesting that the 20 to 25% target is on track. So again, good news there. In terms of what the Trust are focusing on, so noted initially, this idea was that managed act for recharge in particular would be fully across the catchment at a maximum flow of 6 cumecs to achieve the average target of 3.8 cumecs, again within the next couple of years. And then there is a 10-year rollout, if you like, before we see that water flow through the system and do its job, before we can have confidence that it's working through the catchment. We have been working on reducing the environmental impact, if you like, of that, recognising that this water has to come from somewhere, and that somewhere being the Rangitata River, and that water is important for the Rangitata River. And so the current plan, if you like, strategic plan on the right-hand side, has fewer managed aquifer recharge sites in strategically important places. It has 3 or 4 sites focused on the river in strategically important places. And then it has this whole lower catchment area where this current focus is on understanding the role of target stream augmentation, bioreactors and wetlands can contribute to the whole catchment. And so our assessment of all of it is that we can reduce the water requirements of this by about 1/3. So that water does not need to be taken from the Rangitata River in order to do this job if this plan, as it is in concept form at the moment, does its job, does the job that we think. So we think we can do the job with a lower environmental footprint, and actually in the long term a lower cost to the community as well. So that is the aim. We're not going to be able to answer that, well, is that really the case or not, question for some years. There's obviously consenting processes to complete, construction to go, and then operation and monitoring over a period of time. But again, that's on track for the 2035 target. That's been informed by assessing the work that we've done to date on managed aquifer recharge and near river recharge, and also the work around, other work around the country. You may be aware of constructed wetland research and costings and the like. There's been some other bioreactor research that has happened over the while, and so we've been able to take the performance of that in terms of a benefit and the potential costs of that. And so in this graph on the right, we see that there are some real no-brainers. So the top right-hand corner of the graph is what we think are the best solutions overall. So the recycling of nutrients, targeted stream augmentation, which utilises groundwater connected to springs, near river recharge where the water is of low physical cost, and then some managed aquifer recharge being that solution which I posed in the previous screen. Other options are either more expensive but potentially of high benefit, such as the bioreactors and wetlands. So there's a higher construction cost but lower operational cost, so it sits slightly differently on the graph. But when the water is either of high value, that is value in an environmental sense, or higher cost, then that is why we're seeking to reduce the use of those technologies.
Brett, I'll probably regret this question as soon as I ask it. On the scale, on the axis, what's the scale of those numbers? 0.1 to 1, what's the relativity?
Yeah, so this is just proportional change.
Oh, okay.
Yep, so this is not, so what we're aiming for is really something like dollars per kilogram of nitrogen, you know, not going into the system or pulled out of the system. A common metric like that in the end is marvellous, but you can imagine getting to that common metric is really challenging. So at this point in time, we're using best available information and at a higher level, and so it's essentially a cost and a value or a benefit. So it's costs and benefits, but it's in a higher level sense rather than a specific dollars per kilogram sense at this point in time. So they're proportional or relevant to each other, but not to any other specific metric. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. Okay. And the fourth area we're talking about was water allocation. You'll, I'm sure, be more than aware of what's being done in this catchment in terms of the Ashburton River and consents. I noted the Hikio Hines River. That's something that we've been working on with Environment Canterbury in terms of the takes from the river, understanding takes from the river and the like. And we have been very pleased to confirm that there has been no use of surface water from the Hikio Hines River for almost 10 years. And there is no reconsenting of that water anticipated. And so that means that the precious water that is going into that river is almost entirely for the benefit of the river ecosystem, which is good news. And you'll be aware of, I'm sure, the other PC7 and PC2 allocation limits. So in terms of what's being asked, in terms of the next step, the NPSFM stuff, you know, there is a starting position there already in play, which is good. Okay, into the graphs. So as I noted, there's a series of graphs. It's taken a number of years to not only collect the data so that we've got some before and after PC2 data, but we've also got our heads around what this data means. And that's really important. It's really easy to look at graphs and jump to conclusions and then to have those conclusions shot down because they are not justifiable. If I start at the very top, the key contributing change factors. Rainfall is the biggie. Rainfall dumps millions and millions of cubic metres of water in one fell swoop on the plain, and that pressurises the groundwater system and it pushes nutrients through the system. And the effects of those heavy rainfall events we can see for a number of years. So very briefly, if I use the cursor and point at these two, this is rainfall coming up. This is a heavy rainfall year, the biggest of the last 15 odd. And we can see the effects in media nitrate in that year, but we can also see the effects in the following year, even though the following year was a low rainfall year. So this is the lag time, right? We see bores nearby, shallow bores responding quickly, we see other ones responding more slow. So that's the first thing. Apart from that effect, we see generally lower nitrate concentrations in the groundwater during lower rainfall years and higher ones in higher rainfall years. In low rainfall years, we get much less land surface recharge, much slower and less movement of nutrients through the system. So this all makes sense. To pull out the difference between the before, so here's the before PC2 times around the 2014-15. Before that time we had the steady march, the steady increase of nitrogen in the groundwater. To the after PC2, and most importantly the most recent years when we have been able to ramp up the managed aquifer recharge and some of the on-farm nutrient reductions have clearly been coming in. What we can now do is do some before and after comparisons. And this is one way of measuring the difference that we're making. What we have found is that those before and after comparisons are most useful when the rainfall of that year is similar. So a before and after comparison where the rainfalls are completely different is of no use at all. You can see correlations, but there is no useful information out of that. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on in the next few slides, just looking at these equivalent rainfall years. It doesn't mean that we've pulled rainfall out of the equation and all the difference we're seeing is due to what's happening, because where and how much rainfall falls and all of that has quite a bearing on this. So I will work through that as we go. Just two other points on this before we move forward. Another common metric where you've got a data set like this, which is variable and affected by something by rainfall, is you use what's called a moving average. So that takes the first 5 years numbers and gives you a number, then it takes n+1, the next 5 years, and then it takes the next 5 years, so 2006 to 2010, 2007 to 2011, and so that's where we get this. So this is called a moving average. It reduces the effect of the rainfall and it gives us a bit of an idea, and again tells us what we can see in the graph, which is we had steadily rising nitrate in the groundwater till around that 2014-15 mark, and then the groundwater has sort of held. The ECAN data suggesting that it's started to go up in the last 2 years because we've had a lot of rainfall. So the last point, and then I'll pause for you, Richard. The last point is that this data is based on a data set which was determined to be useful for testing purposes for the catchment, to see whether the bores were representative of the groundwater. So we're talking about a whole catchment here, and a set of around about 13 bores were chosen to be potentially representative of shallow groundwater in the catchment. We had no reason to doubt they were representative because we had nothing to compare it with. You'll be aware in the last 4 or so years the community has significantly upped the number of bores, and I'll show you this in a moment, being monitored. And now we have very wide spread, not just shallow bores but also medium and deep bores as well. And so we now have a different data set to work with. Costs a lot more to get this level of detail of data, but we now have 3 years of data at a much larger, much lower spacing between them. That's the dark blue numbers. The dark blue numbers are suggesting at an annual level that the actual variation we are seeing is not the true variation of the catchment, that the actual variation is much less. In fact, in a dry year, the actual nutrient levels may be a little higher, as we see here, but in a wetter year, we're not actually hitting these heights as a catchment whole, that we're actually sitting at a lower number. Richard?
I read the graph and I'm just a bit confused what all you just tried to explain then. I see the annual PC2 median, it's gone up significantly, and then I see the MHV, which I understand through the MHV program through Justin Legg, through
So that plus the PC2,
plus the PC2.
the HH wet board, so that plus the BCI coming in on board
Plus
as well.
that would mean then that the MHV one has dropped significantly in the 2023 year, because if you add the two together, you're obviously, so I'm just very confused. Is the annual PC2 median, is it the same bores being treated?
Good question. Very, very good question, Richard. So the problem with having a small number of bores is if one or two of those bores goes rogue in terms of its numbers, it can throw your median big time. And so what has happened in the last year is that a new bore has been added, and one of the bores that was the lowest has suddenly gone to being one of the highest, and it's a lagged result of the heavy rainfall event of a couple of years ago. It's shown through. So this supposed increase across the whole catchment was actually caused by two bores, in addition of a very high nutrient bore and a current bore, which was very low, going high. Those bores are in this same big data set. In a big data set, when you have two rogue measurements like that, it's very difficult to see the change. It probably won't affect the median. If you have a small data set, the numbers do affect the median. I should be able to, hopefully, if I can jump to the next slide, I'll try and we'll see if it makes more sense. Is that okay? Sorry, in 2 slides' time. I'll just cover this first. So what we're talking about with the the wet and dry year comparisons is we're looking for years with similar rainfall. So here we have a low rainfall and we have a similar low rainfall, 2016 versus 2021. And then we're comparing the nitrates here, and we're seeing that there's a little bit of a drop here, 6%, which is not much, if anything, in the scheme of things. We've got the wetter years, and we're comparing the two of those. And we're saying, oh, plus 2%, again, not measurable in the scheme of things. So the moving mean that we saw tracking along there at about the same is supported by this information, that on the whole catchment wide, we're not really seeing much of a change. We've seen a flattening in the last 6 or 7 years, but we haven't seen the whole catchment change. This was anticipated. This is expected because the groundwater system moves super slow. The river moves fast, the groundwater system moves super slow. Now I'm going to try and answer your question, Richard. Tell me if this makes more sense. The orange one here is the small data set. We're looking at about 13, a maximum of 13 bores. And as per your question, that's not always the same 13 bores. Some of them dry out in dry years and sometimes they add new ones. Here's the big data set. So this is averaging in the last little while about 75, last couple of years, about 75 bores versus 12, 11 to 13. So big difference. So here's the big data set, here's the little data set. The little data set suggests that the numbers, the nitrate numbers, go all over the place following rainfall, that they come down well below 9 and they go up potentially to about 14, which is concerning. The big data set, which includes the little data set, says actually, no, that's not the case. They go down a little way, and then when they come up, they don't come up so far. So we can have more confidence in the big data set, the blue one, because it's got more numbers and it includes all the bores in the little data set. So we're not hiding any rogue numbers or big numbers or little numbers. It's all included, but it's a bigger data set, therefore more representative of the catchment. So the question that we're going to be asking in terms of NPS-FM and future monitoring of the catchment, there's going to be numbers. There's a hard number coming at this catchment. We need to have confidence that that number is being accurately estimated. Yes.
So I can, from that, I understand that the large data set makes perfect sense because I did maths before maths, as everybody else did. What's the scientific credibility of the 13 when you've changed the data set and added a very, very high one? And there's no credibility in that. If we look at the data set, how can that be? Has it been peer reviewed? Has it got credibility, or is it just, it doesn't smell right, is the word I'd use. I'm just concerned because I look at the numbers and see, well, the blue line makes sense. I don't care if it goes up or down. I do care if it goes down, but the scientific, because that's what we're basing our logic on.
That's exactly why we're presenting this as a public meeting, Richard, to ask that question. We have asked that question of Environment Canterbury and had no reply. I totally agree with you. That small data set does smell.
So just to follow on from that, it's an unfinished conversation with the scientists. The problem was that, as I noted, when you go into a drought and we're monitoring shallow groundwater, you need to have bores across and around the catchment, and parts of the catchment, e.g. Eiffleton, you've got a shallow bore in there, it's going to go dry when there's a drought. And so a non-measurement also affects the median of a small data set. So what the scientists are looking for is a data set which is cost affordable, but also representative. And so they've added in this new bore in the last while to replace a bore that was going dry too often. And we are saying if you do that in a small data set, you could have unintended consequences, and that those numbers could be, as you've just done, challenged. And we don't want to go there. We want a data set which is agreed throughout the community as being representative of the catchment groundwater levels, so that collectively we can aim ourselves towards that goal and have confidence that it's being measured appropriately. It's like being pulled over by the police. You know, if they do it just because it looked fast, you know, they're not going to have a lot of credibility. But if they've got a calibrated gun aimed at you, then you're probably going to suck it up, aren't you? All right, moving on.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Chris.
It sort of sounds a wee bit like the original overseer stuff that you didn't know what you're actually modelling because they kept on changing the model every year. So I think it's really important to know what the baseline is, what wells were included, what that data was. You go back and you calibrate all the way back to the beginning if you're going to add something new in. So that because it's like the old overseer, your numbers keep on going down, but they keep on changing the model, so you didn't actually know what the hell was going on anyway. And I see that sort of happening here. But it's one of those things around deep wells. I'm just a lay person, sheep and beef farmer sort of thing, but I know that we farm on top of different aquifers, and there's, 4 or 5 across Canterbury, depth-wise, from the shallow down to the deep. Are we mixing the data between the shallow aquifers and the deep ones and telling us a blended story rather than the shallow aquifers are high going, the medium ones are doing X and the other ones down the bottom are stable? Or we just, how the hell's this thing been stitched together so that we can tell a credible story?
Great question. Okay, so PC2 was not helpful in this regard, in that the wording was incorrect, unfortunately, in the writing of the document, and so we have had that collectively. We've clarified that in the last little while. By we, I mean those of us working with the Environment Canterbury scientists. It was important to define what shallow groundwater meant in this sense. And what was intended and what is being reflected in this data set is wells that are screened within 30 metres of the water table. We have a couple of bores in this data set that meets that criteria that are more than 60 metres below ground level, because the water table is also deep at that point in time. Does that make sense? So what we're defining as shallow groundwater is in relation to the water table rather than in relation to the groundwater level. If that wasn't the case, then the upper plains wouldn't get monitored, except in around the rivers, right? And that the upper plains is important, right? And the water quality in the upper plains reflects what's happening in the lower plains in the future. So it was important to get that right. And so the changes in these numbers, and this is the first time that this big data set has been presented like this. When you have previously seen shallow groundwater comparisons, that has been from ground level. So it's been shallow bores from ground level. That therefore can't be compared directly with the PC2 bores, because they were defined differently. Does that make sense? So this big data set you may have seen from previous presentations from MHV and the like, there is also deep groundwater being presented there, and the deep groundwater tends to sit lower. It has a longer lagged effect, but it still responds to heavy rainfall effects. So you still are getting the nutrients transferring down there. We are still seeing the clean water, the recharge water going down there, and I can't show you today, but one of the bores we've identified very recently, down gradient from one of our larger MAR sites, is 133 metres deep. Hopefully, with landowner permission, we'll be able to show you these results down the track. But it looks like our clean water recharge is getting down to depth as well. And what that means is, back to your question, it's all connected. There are no stratified layers inland from, you know, the coast, the springs, if you like, in the catchment. It is all connected, but there are these old river pathways at different depths where if water gets down to it, it shoots on horizontally rather than carries on down vertically.
So just coming back to that last point, so if we talk about level 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 of the different aquifers, we're concentrating on level 1 mostly, or we're putting level 1 to 5 together down the bottom end? Did you say it is stratified at the very bottom or not?
Yes, so where you've got the marine sediments, they do cause much more impediment to water travelling downwards. Okay. Yes, much greater impediment. In the top layer where you've got, you've got layers of clay and you've got, more dense material there, and if water's trying to go down, it will hit it and it will go in a different direction. But that doesn't mean you'll get past that lens. Well, you will get past that lens at some point in time, and then it will try and go downwards again. Yeah, so. Okay, so we've moved on to the Heke-Hines River. So we've gone from the very slow-moving system to the faster-moving system. So just focusing on our wet and dry years, we've been operating the river recharge at the top end since 2018, late 2018. And we've got another site partway down, which is close to the river, which has been supporting the river as well. You may recall a previous presentation where we showed where the river was flowing below those sites, and we've tracked the river working. We're confident that that water that doesn't stay in the channel goes to the true left and feeds Taylor's Drain. which then goes back into the Lower Hinds River. So we're confident with where the water goes when we are tracking it. So looking at these numbers, so the before the near river recharge to the after, for the wet year, which is this top one, this is nitrate, nitrogen, which is what they measure for there. This comparison of similar rainfall years, there has been an improvement, a reduction, so an improvement in water quality of 14%, mostly driven by a 31% improvement in Taylor's drains. So we can equate that back to the clean near river recharge water going in. Northern Drain, which currently isn't supported by Managed Act for Recharge, but soon will be, hopefully, Richard, depending on how things go. In that same year, there was no difference in the nutrient concentration comparison, so that we can say that the benefits to the lower Hikio Hinds River are primarily occurring down the river channel and from the true left. So that's how we can equate the near river recharge benefit. In a wet year, when there's a lot of water, we weren't necessarily expecting that. We were, however, expecting a benefit in a dry year because there's not as much water in the system. The water that we're putting in is proportionally greater. And again, we've seen an improvement in water quality, actually not as much, but we've seen an improvement in water quality. And again, this has been driven by the Taylor's drain, supported by near river recharge. In that year, Northern Drain actually increased in nitrate, so decreased in water quality, but we still got this improvement in the river quality due to the near river recharge. Just want to briefly touch on the 2.4 number. If it was ever to apply to the Hikio Hinds River, and I'm challenging that because it's mostly a groundwater fed river rather than a surface water fed river, and that makes it very different from the Hakatiri, Ashburton, for example, or an alpine river. If there was ever a target of 2.4, and we look and we go, oh wow, we've hit the target here. Great. Briefly, we haven't quite hit the target here, but it stayed lower for longer. So I'll show you why we hit the target there. We hit the target there because the river was just about dry. So the important point is that ecosystem health for me is about life. It's about life in a river supporting life in various forms. You can have very low nutrients, but if you don't have enough water in there, the water gets hot and everything dies. So a number by itself is not what we're looking for, okay? We're looking for life. So compare that in the dry year. So there was our best water quality. Compare that to this year. So we were able to hold the river at a level that was higher in flow. So we're talking a few hundred litres a second here, but it was higher in flow. The water quality was good, maybe not quite as good, but I can guarantee you that there was a lot more life in the river in this year compared with this year, this dry year. We increased the average flow by 112% in that year, and most of that increase will be due to the near river recharge. So this is a life or death sort of scenario for these sorts of rivers in Canterbury. If we leave them be, remember no surface irrigation taken out in these years. We've got a life or death scenario here. We're able to keep this river alive. The wet year difference here, the wet year difference changed, the flow changed. So the river behaved differently in those two wet year combinations. Chris?
Yeah, no, just that 2015, that's when Fish and Game were going around and rescuing eels and whatever, taking them to Lake Opua. Is that the one?
Exactly.
Cool.
Yep. And by the way, that was a rather significant El Nino drought. And at the moment, we're heading towards El Nino, and if it's a 2 year rather than a 1 year, we're going to need some assistance again in that river. Okay. PC2 don't look at the day-to-day variation. They look at two statistics. Your 95th percentile, so that's 95% of all samples trying to get below this number because we're in water quality, and your median. So the blue line is aiming for the blue line, the red line is aiming for the red line. Apart from the very first year of monitoring, you can see they both sat well above. A couple of years ago, in the last few years, we've got a lot closer. And so that is the progress that I've just been talking about in the last one. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of the metrics in the end. We've still got a way to go, haven't we? We need to get these blue numbers down here. But what we're showing, for example, in a reasonably wet year, an above average rainfall year of 22-23, we had a really good median result. And if you look at other rainfall years like this, they were sitting much higher. Lower rainfall years here, the median was sitting higher. So this is tangible, positive progress for the river. Not there yet, but positive progress. Last one, MPSFM talks about other wider ecosystem health metrics that we can use to define whether ecosystem health on the whole is better or worse. So you've probably heard of QMCI and what it means. It's, although they call it quantitative, there's still a bit of variation. And it's measuring the tolerant species to pollution. So this is a really good indicator if you get the measurements and the analysis right of the life, the ecosystem health. So we want a high number now. With water quality numbers, we want a low number. Here we want a high number. So this is a minimum. We want to get above the minimum. And you can see that these were all sitting above the minimum. These were our drier recent years here. If we go for the current dry year comparison, we can see the Poplar Road, which is the upper of the lower Hekau Hines River monitoring sites, had a massive increase. And that aligns with the water that we had going in via Taylor's Drain and the higher minimum flows. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to keep the river alive all the way down to the mouth. So that doubling of the minimum flow was really good to a point, for a stretch. The fish that were up in that part of the river stayed alive, great. Not enough to get down to the mouth. And so we believe the solution is to get a bit more water in the river than we had next time around, keep measuring these metrics and to see if it makes a difference or not. The wet year, we could see a positive difference, significant positive difference in both the lowest and the low sites. So this is another tangible example of progress. Last graph, I think, nearly through them. I think you've seen this one before. This is our groundwater monitoring down gradient from a MAR site. This has been our proof of concept. So the yellow down the bottom is whether it's operating or not. This is the nitrogen concentration. You can see we've got some really small numbers here. So it's currently sitting around about 1 milligram a litre. And in this part of the catchment, which is not far from Tynwald, that's a very, very low number. And you can see on average over the last 8 years, it will sit around the 2 milligrams a litre. That's even less than that magic 2.4 number. But there is money involved and there is water involved in getting down to these sorts of numbers. So I want to come back to that question later on. Can we do this? Yes, we can. What are the costs and what are the balances that need to be made? I think that's the discussion to be had. But yes, we can do it. Nearly finished. Just wanted to note some of the wider benefits of these projects. So this is our large near of recharge site. Some of you may have visited this up at the South Hines. It was upgraded after the flooding. The landowner, since we have started on this site, has retired more than 25 hectares of their farm. That's a really big number, whether you want to walk it or whether you want to think about the value of that on the market or whatever. It's a really big number. It's happened in the last 5 years. The number of new native plants in the Zone Committee have supported a number of projects up there. In fact, you supported this project up Limestone Creek, I think. And Environment Canterbury staff helped us plant those. So there's more than 1 kilometre of length of river planted up there as well. And the life is coming back here. The native fish, we did not put any fish in here when we dug them out after the flooding. We do not know how the first bullies got in there. We know how the numbers increased. We do not know how the first bullies got in there, but life abounds up there now. The lizards are still protected through the dock covenant, and the increased bird life up there is tangible. So these were some of the pictures that I showed you before, some of the close-ups. So this is the most recent. So all the tributaries now of the Upper Hinds have been retired from stock, fenced off and planted, all of them. This is the earlier one, so these are mostly cahicateas around here, and then the wetland species. And then the big bunch in the middle. And then maybe in the future, the extension of the native forest right down to a public access point at the river, at the bridge. Talked about the bird life. Would love a photo of the bittern that was living there, but he was rather elusive. And likewise with the marsh crake, they're quite hard to get a photo of on site, but this kotuku let me photograph him when he was last on site a little while ago. This is, we think, the same one that was there as a little bird a couple of years ago. Come across the Rangitata Gorge and hung around for a while. And as I said, this is one of the first geckos to be transferred up to its new home, and so we're presuming they're doing well. But of course, you don't see the smart lizards; they keep out of sight, or they don't stay alive for long. Last slide. This is where, no, second to last slide. So, brief summary. We are seeing improvements across all of these areas. These are measurable, tangible improvements. We note and agree with concerns that we've heard about the use of clean water from an alpine river being used to deal with the legacy issue in a catchment. And so we have confidence in this scaled back project that requires less water from an alpine river to do the same job, because the other technologies don't require external water. We're not confident that only bottom of the catchment as an end of pipe, if you want to call it that way, bottom of the catchment wetland only initiatives is going to make the difference, because it's not going to clean up the groundwater system on the way. It's not going to reduce the potential harm for people drinking the water and things like that. It's not going to achieve that. On-farm changes, likewise, will not achieve that in our lifetime or the next lifetime by themselves. So we hope that the likes of Managed Act for Recharge, the requirement for that, if we can get through this legacy nutrients, will be able to be scaled back over time. And that will be for the benefit of the whole catchment. Will cost less, will require less water, land, all of those sorts of things. The near river recharge, which is what I've just been working through, we are very confident in the analysis and in the monitoring that this is already having a tangible benefit and deserves to be scaled up. So, this is what I would like to pause on if we haven't hit 40 minutes. We think the PC2 targets can be achieved. They were challenging, they are challenging, we think they can be achieved. We think that the Hikio-Hines Plains, there is enough evidence to show that it operates essentially as a single system. The Hikio-Hines River doesn't stop water travelling underneath it from the old glacial outwash of the Rangitata Glacier. It goes underneath that river. So looking ahead to FMUs and sub-FMUs and all of that sort of stuff doesn't make technical sense to have a divided Hikio-Hines Plains as a sub-FMU. It does make sense for it as a sub-FMU, potential FMU, more likely as a sub-FMU for the whole plains to be managed that way. We can see the effect of rainfall already in the data sets, and now we can see our imprint, if you like, of what we're doing over that rainfall. Noting the climate cycle, we've moved from the easier, nicer climate cycle where the heat's been sitting in the ocean to the much more challenging, accelerated climate change cycle that we're going to see over the next 20 odd years. It should not be a surprise that glaciers are melting fast and all the stuff is happening. That's the climate cycle. That's what the climate does. The heat's coming out of the ocean now in a hurry, and it's going to be a different beast for the next 20 years. We need to be cognizant of that and track that as well, which means we're going to be water short more years than we have in the last 20 years. Hopefully, Chris, means less flood upon flood upon flood. The triple La Nina has only happened at this change of cycle historically. Hopefully, we'll see. The long-term monitoring records, and as we've talked about, the size of the monitoring record is really critical, and I think that's a big question that needs to stay on the table. We haven't solved it yet. As we said, this big data set, it's actually about 100 odd bores in that data set. It's expensive to do this level of monitoring at the moment. We probably don't need 100 bores to be representative, but we don't yet know what that number is. But by having a big data set, you can then make that a smaller and smaller data set and play around with that data. When you only have 13 bores, you can't extrapolate from that. So we're going to work collaboratively on this. This is not an us and them thing at all. On farm, clearly, there are lots of really good plans in play to assist farmers to manage nutrients and water on farm better and better. And we need to keep doing that as well. And the last point, just noting that we have confidence with what we've seen to date that this environmental infrastructure has a role to play. However, it is really important to keep the costs, and by costs I mean environmental, cultural as well as economic costs, on the table beside the benefits so that we can have a fully informed discussion about this in the future. Have we hit the clock yet?
You have. It's quite a presentation, but there's a lot to take in. You made some really good points, obviously, along with, and I'm just working out what you want us to do. Because if these are the potential contributions that make this process work, what will stop that from happening? And I think one of the points you said, a number by itself will not be the answer, and that's really become very obvious, and ECAN seem to be driven by a number, or other people are, and you can have that number and then the Hines River or the Ashburton River goes dry and you've killed everything. So we've got to get that balance right. You can't be half in this system or not. You either believe in the recharge model, or you don't. And I'm just wondering whether we get you to do a one-pager about what would potentially prohibit this from happening, or what, so we can give some information to ECAN saying, well, if we're supporting this project, we don't want these barriers of changing wells and changing bores and sticking to a number but not seeing the big picture. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but that's what I sort of got out of that.
I think what will inhibit this from happening is a withdrawal to the corners and a return to old adversarialism rather than the collaboration that we've seen through the strategy. I think that's the most important thing that we need to avoid, which means that the scientists who all have something to offer can work together, that we can agree collectively on what is representative monitoring, and we can proceed. If there's a withdrawal to adversarialism, we lose that opportunity.
Yeah, I've got a comment and a question. I was just reading Ravensdown's financial reports that came in just the other day. They sold 27% less fertiliser last year than they did the year before. So we've hit peak cows, perhaps we've hit peak fertiliser as well. So the farmers are listening, and they are they're doing stuff. They are environmentally friendly. Going forward, what hurdles have you got to achieve the good work you're achieving? Have you got hurdles?
Thanks, Neil. We're in a consenting process at the moment to expand the scheme, as you saw by that slide with the number of sites. Those consents were lodged in December 22. That process is considerably long going, fraught with turns and twists. We're in a public meeting and I don't want to say too much, but it's certainly not an easy process and not a guaranteed process.
So just on that one, Peter, we've got the Hines plan change too, and that enables various things, including managed aquifer recharge, targeted stream. But going back right to the very beginning, I was really supportive of when HWET was being set up in association with the Zone Committee, that you could have a long, enduring process if you're going to try an engineered solution, to actually have something in the country that was starting here and looking at all the different. But we've got a plan that enables it, but is it providing barriers as well to try and get things over the line? Or am I missing something? I know ECAN's in an absolute paralysis when it comes to issuing resource consents. Am I seeing that, or are you saying that in your...
Well, that is part of it, Chris, but Brett's comments about us not retreating to corners, that's a very important comment just at the moment, that we need to be continuing working together, and parts of this were not.
I think in the sake of time, to keep things going, I think picking up on Neil's point about what are the barriers or the hurdles, as Chris is saying, and you guys are the best place to know that. We obviously got an idea what we think they are, but do you think you could put something together for us as a zone committee about, and then we can send a letter or whatever to ECAN and discuss, you know, what their views are and the greater community, so we're on the right page?
That'd be very helpful, Bill. Yes, we'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
It's really important that we don't get involved in consenting issues
Yep.
in the committee, but to enable having a planning process that delivers an outcome, we just need to know where if there's a problem around the process.
And not really. And there was no new information there. And have you got something new?
Yeah, just quickly. First of all, I wanted to say thank you for the presentation. And I just wanted to go back to the earlier point where you referenced collaboration and the Hikio Hines Science collaboration. So I just really want to reinforce we can't underestimate the power of collaboration. Having started Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, 18 months ago, the knowledge sharing that's happening in that catchment has been enormous. But what we're finding now is in Mid-Canterbury, as a regionally focused thing, we're having a future-focused Mid-Canterbury discussion on. We've got groups that are now starting water monitoring programs. I think we've got 3 programs up and running. We've got 2 more that are looking at doing it. What we need to best understand, it's paramount that when groups and individuals invest in water monitoring, that we ensure that everybody can feel confident in what they're doing it, where they're doing it, why they're doing it, and that the monitoring has rigour, and that the changes that we're making are actually having an improvement to our water quality and can be measured. And from my role as coordinator for Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective, all of these conversations are pretty much unobtainable unless we've got, you know, examples like yours to draw from. So it's listening to that specific to over there, but I think the learnings we can take across our whole region from this can't be underestimated. So I'm enormously grateful as a recipient of your information and science. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Pete and Brett. We appreciate that. We're going to have a little bit of a rejuggle to just keep things moving. So we're going to... Janine's here, and Willie and Keith can do your presentation if that all works together. Janine, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. to just.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the Zone Committee on Carter's Creek. We had many undertakings already in recent years, but particularly the rainfall event of at the end of July brought a lot of things to a head. So we're here seeking your attention again, and now particularly around the amount of water, not the water quality. So it's more where others want to save water, we want to get rid of it. So yeah, so that's maybe you want to kick it off, Keith. You send in a letter as a concerned homeowner in the Tynwald area.
Thank you, Willie. So we had, obviously there was a significant rainfall event happened in July, and I just basically started talking to some of our neighbours, and I know we've got Cam here from round at Millybrook, and talking to a few of them down there, and then going further up into towards the main road, and basically they were all having the same issue, that these flooding events were occurring on almost an annual, biannual basis sort of thing. So what I probably took from that is talking to the neighbours and people adjoining the creek, is individually everyone was putting things through to ECAN or to the council to try and get things happening, but nothing seemed to be, no one was actually seemed to get any action, and nothing seemed to be happening. And it seems to be that it's been going on for quite a while. So I thought, well, look, I caught up with Richard Wilson at one of the drop-in centres at the library, and he said, the best thing is to probably just formalise it and start the process. And I understand that everything's got a process and a system to work through and that sort of thing. So I thought, well, that's probably the best way to start, and that's where I put a formal letter in and put on some comments from the other adjoining property owners, sort of thing. So in addition to that, I'd also done a bit of reading of some past correspondence from both the council and ECAN, and there's an ECAN report from 2009 which clearly states that there is an issue with that the creek hasn't got the capacity to handle the water going through urban Tynwald. And there was a few sort of solutions that it suggested, like bigger culverts, potential cut-offs above Tynwald to reduce that flow through, sort of thing. So, but the other issue that's probably affecting us when these events happen, the volume of water is significantly cutting into the riverbanks, and obviously, what I call it a river, it's a small creek generally, but it becomes quite a large river when these, significant amounts of waters come in, and so they're not set up for these volumes amount of water, and they're cutting into these riverbanks. And if you look at some of the properties, that it's actually starting to affect buildings and property, and things that they're basically falling into the creek. So it's undermining the riverbank, sort of thing. So so I'm hoping I caught up. We went to post July. We had a catchment meeting, which was real good. Unfortunately, Willie got some of the more angry ones. Tugger. We tried to calm a few people down, sort of thing. So, and that's the sort of thing that people are angry and upset, but there's no point throwing stones. It's trying to basically get your guys' support on we're trying to work on solutions and what we can do and what avenues we've got, sort of thing. So yeah. So you can probably see from those photos that I don't need to put a slideshow up with 50 slides. There's a pretty serious issue there, sort of thing. So yeah. So no, thank you.
That's good, Keith. Thanks for that. We appreciate you writing and going to the effort of doing that, because it certainly focuses the issue, and it's obviously an issue for ECAN and ADC, but
Yeah, actually, just on that, that's probably one point that it's a very grey area, as in who's responsible for it. Is it a rural drain and then going into an urban drain, or is it, yeah? And obviously, I think that's what some of the issues that some of the property owners have had, that it's getting tennis balled, you know, I'd say ADC or it's ECAN. Yeah, the other thing I just thought of was, you know, doing some reading. There's been some significant money spent on the Mill Creek through town here. You know, in terms of, you know, stabilising bank and that sort of thing. So I've already talked to Councillor Brahm about, you know, he's investigating further into, you know, what happened in that case, and, you know, is that something we can gain some information from that process that we can transfer over to what we're looking at, sort of thing. So,
Well, the good thing is we've got the Mayor here and Janine, so hopefully we can see what's happening. So Neil, you'll have an opinion, obviously.
Yeah, I know Mill Creek, that has been strengthened and stabilised or whatever over the years, was not an easy job because of property boundaries, which leads on to my question here. I'm looking at that photo, and are those buildings on the property boundary? And if they are, you've got a problem for making it bigger, I would think.
Yep.
And if they're not, there's still a problem because they'd have to be removed to make the creek bigger. If you want to put more flow down, you've got to make a bigger creek.
yeah, yeah.
Or you get rid of the water somewhere else before it gets there. And I haven't read that report, it's just been tabled there today. But there's solutions there. But and rivers and drains are generally ECANs, not district council. But I think the conversation's got to be had. Someone's got to take ownership of it, and someone's got to do something about it. Don't matter who it is, but it needs to be pointed and laid at someone's feet.
Yeah.
I think
the building there is only basically a garden shed lean-to. Yeah.
Yeah, Neil, good point. So Janine, is this where you come in, is it?
Well, I was thinking this is probably a nice segue into the rest of
I
our,
thought it was rather nice too.
into the rest of our presentation. So, so obviously I'm facilitating the Carters Creek Catchment Group, and Willie is the chairperson. And both Keith and Cameron, who's back here in the audience, joined us in our last Catchment Group meeting. We've only had 3 meetings. Just to remind you that, this map isn't that clear, but basically the catchment can almost be divided into, into 3 parts. We've got this upper section here above Tynwald. We haven't had, as a catchment group, we haven't had a lot of engagement with this group of people here. The group started in late April with really interest from the lower catchment, but obviously since this July rain event, we've had a lot of engagement with Tynwald. So, so just reminding you, you've got this very interesting rural-urban catchment. It is the first catchment group that sort of spans both urban and rural in the district, but you've got these 3 distinct areas. Yeah. Willie, do you want to talk us through? This is where we've come from.
so. Like for instance, you might be aware that in Lake Hood we had a issue with cyanobacteria. Also, we've been talking since 2004 about Carters Creek. It was a bit of a town silver at the time. We started living at Riversdale, which is close to Lake Hood, and it was Dave Dines. No, it was not Dave.
Ryan.
Ryan Dines. He formed a group, and we had actually a couple of meetings together, and then it just disappeared again as people were doing their own thing. But also somehow we didn't have the enormous rain events, but then back in 2017 there was a massive event, and it set parts of Tynwald underwater, and I think some people had to be rescued even at that time.
Sandbagging.
So then we thought if we get this creek, because there's always some E. coli in the stream, there's some fencing required. It never comes further than the ECAN office, and whenever we have a willing officer at ECAN, they seem to disappear to Christchurch. And so we have yeah, we have to address these issues and who's going to pay for it. You know, like it's one thing to do a thing, and then we also need to have the support from the authorities to push it through. So we finally had a group in late April. It was about 10 people. We started with the Ciano thing was really the catalyst to make it work. We put a funding proposal together and we were successful. Thank you very much for that. And we're doing some, we have actually got quite a few good samples now, and we have some ideas where some of the stuff comes from. Then we established a governance structure with treasurer, secretary, and chairman, and committee members. And particularly at the bottom end, there's, at that time there was some issues around drainage. Justin Quaid and was one other person, Dwyer. They were really concerned, and myself as well, but I didn't want to push myself to the front. We have Carter's Creek continuously overflowing when there's a serious rain event now. Then we had a meeting with a group of us with ECAN to look at all the signs. Some interesting stuff came to the fore that we hadn't seen before. Then we had a site meeting in front of the Riversdale homestead to look at all the issues there, and it's very obvious that the culverts can't cope with the amount of water that comes, and that proved to be true in the 27th of July when the big rain event happened. And then we had a meeting with ECAN to understand compliance findings, and then I think that was that before the flood event?
Yeah, it was. So all these things, we were basically working, we put together a structure. Sorry, we put together a structure. We had these two working groups. We talked to you guys, you'd given us some funding. We were sorting out how we were going to approach the science investigations. You know, we had these meetings to really fine tune our approach. And then obviously, 27th of July, we had this big event. And so we've sort of had to pivot and really go back to the drainage issues as the focus, because we've had an influx of new members, and while we were starting to work on that stuff, we've really had to, you know, dive deep into this area now.
Yeah. We actually been here before, back in 2019, I think it was, when Janine was still more or less in charge of the Mid-Canterbury section of the zone. So we had these meetings at the Tynwald primary school, and it was the same issue also. Then the flood events overshadowed everything that we were trying to do. But the flood issues need to be addressed, because I think the urbanisation of Tynwald has had a greater effect on Carter's Creek than what the planners had thought to be possible, or underestimated them. Yeah.
So you've seen some of these photos. These are included in Keith's letter. A lot of these photos are also taken by Cameron and his neighbours. So the Millybrook subdivision, and then there's a cluster of residents around Keith's area and Grove Street. So as Keith has already relayed, you know, from his personal view, we're really looking for support around how, you know, we can work in a collaborative way with both agencies and the community to, you know, address some of these issues. I understood 950 kilograms of rubbish was removed and debris after that 27 July rain event. ECAN staff came and took away some of that. Now, this is not a creek that's managed for flood protection, so that was just something that ECAN staff did. It is a drain, so, you know, it falls in the, you know, the Ashburton Hines drainage scheme, and so one of the conversations we've been having is that the right place to leave it, given that we've got these issues. So these are some of the photos. Cameron, this is from your area, you know, lovely, you know, looks very pretty under, you know, low flow conditions, and a lot of residents have obviously put a lot of time into the gardens and landscaping, making it look quite aesthetic through parts of it. But, you know, it's bringing down quite a lot of stuff. You can see the implications for nearby buildings and infrastructure.
And that's after it's gone down too.
Yeah, yeah. And this is in the lower stretches of the catchment. This is on Willie's property.
There is a culvert under the road crossing, but yeah, it just doesn't cope at all. There's in the report it says that all culverts have to be a minimum of 1,500, and I discovered that in 2011 the council, or you can put culverts in on Boundary Road at 1,200. Yes, got measurements on those, and there's two 600 mil culverts there, just after that weir.
So at our drainage site meeting in June, before this event happened, where we were on Willie's property, but also looking at a couple of other properties and things that the landowners could take responsibility for and start doing. And we're also talking to Environment Canterbury about issues around, stock access, fencing, improving the banks, riparian planting. So, the people in the catchment group are really motivated to see what kind of things they can take on board. But there are some issues upstream. And we've tried to summarise them here. We're trying to keep this brief, and we keep referring to the Environment Canterbury report from 2009 that was written by Anthony Boyle, so a river engineer, and basically it had 6 recommendations, and we'd really like some support from, some of those recommendations relate to the District Council because they are to do with the stormwater management, they're to do with the roads, so they are things outside of Environment Canterbury's jurisdiction, but then there are other parts that do fall into ECAN's jurisdictions around the cut-off drains above Tynwald. Actual cleaning of the creek. We've had a commitment from Environment Canterbury that we will have a mechanical clean, which hasn't been done for a while. So we're really pushing for that to happen because obviously things need to dry out a little bit before they can get onto that. We'd love some flow gauging. We'd love to really understand what's coming down in these more regular events. Willie has already got a list of some of the culverts that are blocking and has, done some work on reviewing culvert sizes. What else have we got there? We're already talking to ECAN around obviously stock access and getting some follow-up on properties where we know that, there is still stock entering the waterway and creating some problems. And we know that Environment Canterbury have been looking into some of the septic tanks in the area and following up their compliance and whether there's any issues with leaks. That's more on the water quality front. And, many of the residents are aware of the Mill Creek Enhancement Project. And if you look at the 2009 report, it does talk about the possibility for, even back in 2009, for Carter's Creek to be treated similarly, with a sort of a holistic joined up project where both agencies could potentially work together. And there was a working party that was established at the time that put into place so that residents could have a voice on that. So we do know that that would require quite a lot of investment, and that money's not there at the moment. So the group is looking at, how do we get into the annual planning processes? How do we get into the long-term plan processes and, put some of these ideas forward and see if we can get some support for them. And Willie, you're very hot on obviously looking into, whether Carter's Creek is appropriately sitting in the right river rating district. Yeah. Should it be in the Ashburton River District? Should we have flood protection as part of what we're rating for, given that there's so many urban properties now that are being impacted by this small creek? And it also is impacting, obviously, Lake Hood. And we have a big, we've got a new subdivision sitting down there that, is being impacted by these flows coming through.
Yeah, Janine, just speaking to the last point you're making there, I think it's between the two agencies, right, between the District Council and the Regional Council. But right at the very beginning of the meeting when we were talking about the RPS, and I said about having a plan, it sounds to me like there needs to be a management plan for Carter's Creek.
Correct.
It's going to look at what is the rate, is it a special rating district, so the people of Tynwald, whether urban or rural, can manage that river and have the resources, or everyone's contributing to it. First and foremost, it's around flood protection, but you can also bring in the water quality aspect as well.
Just to prove a point, currently it's a drain, so there's no flood protection requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the last thing we want is the new State Highway 1 bridge being cut off during a flooding event when it's going to be keeping the north and south open. So I think it actually, the request is actually with the Regional Council and the river rating process and getting a management plan for it. So if it's a culvert issue, because I was looking at that 09 report, yeah, just changing one or two culverts is not actually a solution. It's actually a plan with who contributes and sorts it out on behalf of all the landowners. That's my suggestion.
There's good and bad news. The bad news being that as a committee, we can't commit any council to any funding or anything like that. But if it's on our action plan, which it is, it's one of our focuses for this 21-24 was Carter's Creek, Mokanui, etc. like that. So we can present the information that you've given to us, plus add a bit to the councils, and then they will deliberate what they want to do. And I don't know what Neil has got any.
Got any what?
Well, what we've, as you say, we can't commit to anything, but we can follow through our plan and we can say, well, the Carter's Creek is more drainage and more damage, and this is what we're seeing, and just pass it on.
Yeah, and Councillor Wilson might add further to what I'm going to say, but when we had the Chair Peter Scott here on Wednesday last, Councillor Wilson asked the question about Carter's Creek to him, and he passed the the ball to Councillor Mackenzie and said for him to look into it and report back. So Councillor Mackenzie should be aware of it.
I think he dug this up.
Okay, great. But you're right, someone needs to take ownership of it. I've just had one question. Mechanical clean of the creek. Looking at the pictures, you'd have to get into the creek to do it. How would you do it?
And you're probably thinking more the rural side of it, aren't you? Because
So where it comes to your and your neighbour concerned, you're quite willing to make a compromise, as I gather, to at least get flow through it.
Yeah. Well, the likes. What I see is like obviously if it's classified as a drain, well, the drain can't cope, and what it's doing is undermining the soil and the riverbanks, and that's undermining the consented buildings like sheds and housing. Because my neighbour's
He's dropping, isn't he?
he's having real issues, with his foundations, and it's falling into, and his building's actually cracking, and that's the worry is that there's consented homes right by this drain that are now being affected, and then that's going to obviously flow on to start affecting property values, and at the end of it, someone's going to have to pay, sort of thing. So yeah.
The river staff from ECAN tell me that it's site specific. They would build it in. So while they talk about a mechanical clean, that tends to be in the countryside. So for that urban stretch, which they have done before, they would tend to go through. It would be done in person. There'd be some hand clearing. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure what that entails, but they would have to talk to all the landowners in advance. It would need to be done.
And also, there's it's a bit more complex because if we get the water quicker away, you also get higher volatility of the water, which can cause more damage again.
I remember this being talked about many, many years ago, probably around the 2009, and there was talk about stopping the water from coming in up country and diverting it just before the highway. And I'm not sure where that went. Obviously, it didn't go anywhere. But there should have been some work done to send it to the river then in high flows. So I'm not sure what happened there.
Some of that is referenced in that 2009 report. Neil, I do know that one of the investigations looked at a potential cut-off, but they found that the gradient was too high to deliver it to the river. But there is another area where they have actually secured easement for a potential new cut-off, and I don't know. That's the kind of thing we'd have to recheck where that's progressed to since. Yeah.
There was also work done, or thoughts of what work should be done on the bottom end to stop that water going into Lake Hood, because the quality of it is not great, and sending it back to the river before it got there, before it got to Lake Hood. But I'm not sure where that got to either.
We were working on the highway, but at the moment something else is more important.
Yeah. So I think what could be undertaken is that Councillor Mackenzie works with you, and he involves me in as well. Once you've gathered the information, perhaps yourselves and Councillor Mackenzie and myself could have a a chat to see where it needs to lie.
So I think it's to move this all forward. We've been playing tennis as Keith said for a long time now, and I think it would be much better if we, in the trend of Jacinda Ardern, form another committee. But I think it would be good if we get some commitment from ECAN and from the council, that not only from what we potentially could do, but that we get a committee that can put some pegs in the ground and say, hey, this needs to happen, rather than, and that, I don't know where, there needs to be some science. I don't think there's even a 100-year floodplain for Tynwald. So I've never seen one, let's put it that way. We have 500-year floodplains for Lakewood. So,
I think that perhaps no need to make more committees, but you've got the committee there, you've got myself and you've got Ian,
yes.
and perhaps even Councillor Wilson too, let's try and solve
in the same room, but then we also
and
need
come up with a plan to where it should go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I can, yeah.
We should acknowledge that Councillor Brahm has been to the catchment group meetings as a Tynwald resident, and we have appreciated that, so. Yeah,
Well, he may be involved too if he's
Yes,
got knowledge.
yeah.
He was wanting to be here today, but I must have other issues that are more important.
And if we can just mention also that definitely what you're saying, Neil, about the impact on Lakewood, you know that there's a separate entity that set up the Lakewood Water Quality Task Force this year, and you know one of their investigations is in the relative impact of Carter's Creek on their water quality issues. So that work, and we've been liaising with that group as well.
Probably my comment is this is a classic case. We talk about FMUs and, streams running into lakes and running in. This is a small one that could be done reasonably well, because it's a small creek drain, stormwater channel that runs through an urban environment and then goes down to a lake at the bottom. We have groups in all these places that are starting to talk about doing stuff. We just need to get them together. But the best option is, I think, the catchment group with all those people in it can push back and drive. It's community pushing out. So we just need to keep not another committee, but get the Lakewood water quality group into the catchment group, because they're obviously worried about their water quality, and it's Carter's Creek causing it.
We do have members from Lakewood with quite a lot of representation from them. They've been very active, with us as well. And then
hold it to account you talked about fencing of waterways. I thought that was done 2 years ago. That was law. So if it's not being done, that's just purely an enforcement thing.
We are not the enforcers, so we...
No, that's what I'm saying, but that's an enforcement issue. If I put that wide, that's an enforcement issue. It's not a problem, it's just an enforcement issue. Same as speeding or anything else. So we just need to make sure all the enforcement's been done, so that you're not having to do enforcement first before you can actually move forward.
So we're looking for commitment from the councils, individual councils, to come on board and stop playing tag.
We just had Jen, sorry, we've missed you, but you ready for a question?
Yeah, thank you. And it relates kind of to what Richard was just saying. I wondered, because you mentioned earlier about the three sort of parts of that catchment, and you'd mentioned that the sort of upstream end weren't so engaged. I'm wondering if they are now. That's the first part of my question.
Yeah, we have tried, Jen. To be fair, we've actually only had 3 meetings since late April, 2 in person and 1 was online. So the group was really, the nucleus of people came together late April, met again in June and created the governance structure. Then the rain event happened in July.
Right.
And we've subsequently had this next meeting in person with new representatives. So we're really still forming and, storming and working ourselves out, but we are very mobilised to recognise that there are all those people above Tynwald that we somehow, and we had that discussion at the last meeting, like how do we talk to them, reach out to them, and we discuss various ways on social media and mail drops and so on. So we've got, that's a work on for us, definitely.
Yeah. So that's what I'm kind of thinking of, because obviously a lot of this problem is coming from upstream. That's where the water's coming from, the actual water. And so it seems that it's absolutely necessary to have those people who are living up there to be on board with this collaboration. And if we as the Zone Committee can help in terms of liaising between ADC and ECAN and making sure, you know, that there is something happening from that perspective, if the catchment group can, you know, make that effort to reach out to those upstream people, because it's going to require them, I think, very much so, to be part of this effort if there's going to be a collaborative plan put in place.
Yeah, no, I completely recognise that. Thank you for that. We have this catchment group has got a column in the Ashburton Guardian Farming Supplement, which goes out in September. So all the catchment groups have been given the chance to profile themselves and what they're up to. And so this catchment group has taken the first slot. So Willie's got a column and that's coming out hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So, I mean, it is obviously something that just the Guardian subscribers, but then we'll reach out to other media and we'll look at other ways of raising awareness of the group.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Does Tynwald stormwater end up in this drain?
I don't know roughly where it starts, but at a certain point the highway can't cope. There's a 400 mil pipe that ACL put in after the 2017 floods, and along Wilkins Road, but there's only so much capacity in that, and then particularly Highway 1 flows. I think that's where the dramatic effect is, but this is only imagination. But like there is a lot of land above Tynwald, but I don't know if it's all responsible for the enormous.
There is in one of the ECAN reports, and I think it's that 2009 one, there's about 700 hectares of rural land drains into it. I think there's about 17 urban hectares gets drained into the creek.
With houses on.
Above.
Well, we know that, yeah, there's been a lot of intensification since, but the report does refer to the stormwater component.
So
that's
what I'm thinking. The water off the streets is collected.
Definitely. Above a certain amount of rain, the water goes into the creek, and also there is stormwater pipes that come in the culverts and which actually block on the culverts, particularly Grove Street. So they diminish the capacity of the culverts dramatically.
Seen that one, yeah.
Sounds good. I think we're getting quite operational now.
Yes.
So I think we might get Chris, you might be able to sum this up in a nutshell for us.
Hey, thanks for that. Yeah, thanks. That's all. No, hey, thanks for bringing that along, because seeing the pictures and knowing what's going on. But I think we need to have an action that's what you guys and Ian McKenzie and the Mayor and the councillors are going to do, and report back to us that if there's any support that we do, because it's one of our priorities. But if you guys can come along, never waste a crisis. You've got the hearts and minds focused on it, but don't let it go, because
for the two crises this year.
we need a plan, or the community needs a plan. We can't sign up and tell you to do things, but if you can come along and let us know how you're doing, we can help facilitate and engage with the regional council and the district council if they're being a little bit sluggish. But I think having a plan on the Carters Creek will bring everyone together. When everyone knows their roles, I think a lot of those other problems will hopefully go away over time. Yep. But I think if that sums it up as, we will keep a watching brief on it.
Are you talking a letter to ECAN and ADC, or what?
I would expect within a couple of months, we would expect Ian or the Mayor to be able to update us of how you guys are getting on, as to whether we receive anything a bit more formal. Would that be a good action?
Yeah, I think a letter from the committee to ADC and ECAN suggesting that they liaise with and find out what the problems are and look at pathways forward for resolutions.
Right.
Solutions, yeah. So a letter from here would be helpful. And for the ECAN and ADC to report back to Zone Committee as to what's happening.
Right. Do we need a motion for that? Or? Okay. So, you're moving the motion?
Yeah.
You've got that, right? Are we seconder for that motion? Richard? Thank you. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks for your presentation, and hopefully make some progress.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
It's appreciated, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we've got Jessica. Jessica, and thanks for being patient. Certainly not a...
Oh, yeah.
Jessica's item 10.
Yeah, I think I remember. That's ejected now. Oh, the sun's just travelling up and glad you called me. It's starting to cook.
Welcome, Jessica. If you'd like to proceed with your presentation, please.
Kia ora. Let me just get the old... first of all, I just wanted to say thank you to the Ashburton Water Zone Committee for allowing me to come along and present the Y Connection to yourselves. I've been travelling around Canterbury over the last couple of months presenting this to all the zone committees, so it's really great to be able to come along to yourselves as well. Now, a few of you will have seen this presentation as it currently is. A few of you would have seen the first time I tried to do the presentation when it didn't work. So apologies to those who've seen it before. You can judge me at the end to see how well I'm doing at this point of the presentation. So I'm here today to talk about the Y Connection project. This is a nationally supported project that focuses on engagement within each region. We fit into the Essential Fresh Water Fund. We're part of the catchment group element of the fund. Our goal and focus is supporting at a catchment level, at an individual on the ground level, such as the groups we've heard talking today. Wonderful to hear the work you're doing in your region. The Y Connection sits alongside all the existing other work that's going on out there, such as the New Zealand Landcare Trust. We're actually working very closely with those. I think there we go. We're also working directly with catchment groups, we're working with regional councils, and we're working with our leading partner organisations, Mountain Sea Conservation Trust, which are based up in up in Northland. So the Y Connection, as I said, is a national project. It is being led by Mountain Sea Conservation Trust, as I said, up in Northland. It's utilising their existing network of provider organisations that have been out doing work for the Trust, focusing mostly on community and catchment engagement, school engagement projects and things like that. We've been working alongside Mountain Sea Conservation Trust since 2016 and actually worked alongside them in the creation of this programme. We're also privileged enough to be supporting the national delivery of the project from a scientific perspective, and I'll delve a bit more into that in a moment. Across the whole of New Zealand, this project has the capacity to support 100 catchment groups. It's catchment or community groups, a group that's a collective around the health and the well-being of an awa. The Y Connection is kind of split into two realms. There's the national level support and then there's a regional level support. The national support is led by, as I said, Mountain Sea Conservation Trust. They're providing the overarching support, reporting back to MFE and providing training for all providers. Another side of that is the technical and science support, which is being led by EOS Ecology ourselves. We're providing science, content development and design, and geospatial mapping support. We're also providing project-based website and a community-based monitoring website, and developing additional community-based resources as and when they are needed. So a little bit about EOS Ecology in case you don't know who we are. We are fundamentally a surface water, freshwater ecology company. We've been working in that space for around about 21 years now, led by Erin and Shelley. We also focus very much on the engagement, so taking our science and understanding and taking that out to the community in a multitude of different ways. A little flit of some of the stuff that we've been doing. These are our Nature Agents programme. You can see myself in the centre doing water quality sampling down at Ararira Springs with a bunch of students. We also do community event days, again, mostly involving students and young people and bringing them to that hour level and getting them to understand what's going on in their local area. We've helped develop a range of resources, one being our Nature Agents project, which is a Ministry of Education funded programme, and we've been delivering that within Otatahi. We're expanding out into Selwyn and the Waimakariri region. We've also worked alongside other trusts to develop resources, one being the National Inanga Spawning Education Programme, which is now a free resource that's available to schools across the whole of New Zealand. But that was just a little bit more about ourselves and ES Ecology, where we're coming from. We do know we have worked alongside some people within this room before. And ES Ecology, as well as providing that national support, we're providing the regional support for Waitaha Canterbury. So within Canterbury, there will be myself as the regional manager, kind of overseeing what we're doing in that space. We're then supported by our sub-regional coordinators. They will be providing on-the-ground support to those individual catchment groups. And they will each have probably around about 5 catchment groups each, but we're not deciding that definitely yet. We'll see how it rolls out as to who we're going to be supporting. Within Canterbury, we'll have the capacity to support 15 groups directly. And the joys of us being able to provide the national support is we've also got the backing of our science and our technical team behind us as well. So the types of support we're able to provide is quite different to some of the rest of the regions. Excuse me. So as I'm sure all of you are aware, whenever you go for big funding streams or anything like that, there are certain stage gates and certain things you need to do for that funding. This being a Ministry for the Environment funded programme, there are certain processes we need to go through. The first one being is that we're needing to host a regional hui. From that, we need to produce a regional needs assessment, which needs to be signed off. Once that's been signed off, we're able to engage with catchment groups. But what this actually looks like is we are bringing together with our regional hui, which we now have a date set for, and a first round of invites have been sent out. We're bringing together iwi, hapu, regional councils, district councils, project partners, catchment collectives, all these things, all the voices that exist within Canterbury, kind of together to actually look at where the real gaps are within the region. Because we don't want to go out and duplicate the work that's already being done. We don't want to go and work in a space where there's loads of work going on. We want to work collectively to work out where the actual gaps are, where we'd be able to go in and do the most support. Once we've had that regional hui, as I said, we'll be sending off that regional needs assessment. This is actually a really simple document. It's not super complex, and it's also can be adapted and changed as we need be. It's pretty much along the lines of, we would like to work with this group, this is why we'd like to work with them, and here are the people who support our decision to work with those groups. So just a little bit about the types of support that's available when we're going out. It's split down into those resources provided by the national team, as well as those online tools. The ability to reach out to our science expertise, in such as developing monitoring plans, and also that on-the-ground support from an individual person. So once a group has been chosen, once we know who we're going to be able to go out and engage with, the coordinator will go down to that group. They'll talk to them, they'll go to one of the meetings, they'll learn about what's going on in their space, and then they'll go back to the national team, who'll be able to produce a current state map series that shows them what's going on in their region, their catchment at that time. So this is based on existing maps and layers that are already accessible through things like Canterbury Maps. But it just brings all that information into one place for them. It's also a really helpful resource for them to utilise when they're going for funding applications. The national team is also providing a really helpful summary guide for the Essential Freshwater Package, which is currently going through approval at the moment, and that basically summarises all of the documents that are out there and then points them in the right directions depending on what they're wanting to do or find out about. As I said, when I get that catchment, that map-based summary, that's available as a hard copy, as a PDF document that they get to take. It's also available for them to have online and for them to go back to and review over time. The national team is also creating a Y Connection project website. It's kind of standard with these sorts of projects, but it brings all that information together. And they're also looking to develop a community-based monitoring online portal, which is a voluntary portal for people to use to access, to enter the data that they're out collecting, and so they can compare it to other catchments and they can use it to share their catchment story. So through EOS Ecology, we have access to the science expertise. It can be things such as help developing a monitoring plan. This is really dependent on what that group actually needs. So these are just examples of some of the stuff that we know we can provide. But once we've engaged with the group and we understand what direction they want to go in and what help they need, these results, what we're able to provide might change. So we really wanted to listen to the groups and see what they need. It could include assistance implementing monitoring plans, such as whitebait spawning if that's needed, and assistance identifying actions, so things like restoration plans, interventions that might be needed. Again, utilising the map series, talking to the catchment group, working out what's best for that region. Sorry, not region, catchment. The key thing with the Y Connection really is that it's a Jobs for Nature funded programme, so it's people on the ground. Our coordinators will be able to engage directly with their 5 catchment groups and support them, I want to say almost in unlimited, but as much time as they can possibly give to them, they can give. Depending on the type of support they need, it could be helping direct them towards ECAN in support for freshwater farm plans, if that is relevant to that catchment. A key one for us is those community connections, so helping them find a way to engage with the community if they're not behind the project that they're currently working on. This could be through our SHMAC kits, the SHMAC kit water quality monitoring. It could be through school-based engagement, really depends on what they need. And it could also be, this is a key one I have heard popping up every group I've gone out and spoken to, is support and understanding of where to go for funding and what you need to do to be able to get those funding applications. So our coordinators can spend the time listening to what they need and then looking for which funding would be best to support that group. We're also working really closely, as I said, with the New Zealand Landcare Trust, and we're going through their ACE learning programme and will be part of the Community of Practice framework. So, as there is always, there are certain things that we're not able to provide through this project, but if these things are needed, we will support a community group in being able to find funding for them. That is things such as expenses related to specialist equipment. It could be trees, planting, things like that. But there are so many funds out there, and the key thing would be helping that catchment group apply for the right fund for them if that's what they need. The key thing I did want to come back, obviously saying thank you for allowing me to come along and talk about this, but is we have got that regional hui coming up, and the date is the 18th of September. I've sent the invite out to all zone facilitators for the zone committees, but I'm also really keen to include at least 1, if not 2, representatives from each water zone committee within Canterbury to come along to that hui and offer their interpretation and their understanding of what the current state is within the region. So I guess the thing, as well as asking you to accept my presentation and provide your feedback, is also bring that to your knowledge, and if anyone would be graceful enough to come along and support us in that. Kia ora.
Well, the first question obviously is, have you been working with our catchment group collector from by Ange?
Yes. Ange is actually invited, has already got her invite to the hui. And we found within Canterbury, which is quite different to the rest of the regions, is we've got the benefit of collectives that are doing so much work within the region. And it'd be foolish for us to kind of come along and ignore that work that's going on. So we will be, as long as they'll allow us, continuing to work alongside the collectives to see where those gaps are within the region.
We just heard a catchment collective trying to start this morning. I see $18 million. How are we going to get some of that money to come into our community, not just be lost on the way through with everybody talking and having acronyms and a heap of names and meetings and committees and stuff, but I didn't really see any. I'm just looking to get some money to Well, if I say catchment to Carter's Creek, you know, we can get some money back here?
So the money is funding for us, for the people, for the time, for us going out and doing stuff. So there isn't actually any money through this available to other catchment groups. What it is doing is it's covering our time for supporting the catchment group, for community engagement, for running school programs, for coming out and doing water quality, for coming out and doing training. You know, all those things that take a lot of time to organise, and also being able to, I guess, bring an expert in. We've got the capacity to do that, as opposed to someone else needing to find the funding for it.
So from your first slide, another question. From your first slide, it was we have a hui in with ECAN and the District Council and a few other people, obviously, with us, the zonal committee.
Yeah.
And if we decide that, if, say, the good people from the Mid-Canterbury area decide that Carter's Creek is a place we need to really pump some effort and some resources into, how hard is it going to be us to get through this? I see it's got a big curve to the side, to get through that, to actually get anywhere? Because that's my concern. You know, it's just going to, you know, because we'll talk about it all. We'll talk, but we want, you know, if we put forward a proposal quite quickly, and it, you know, is it going to be a difficult thing, or is it just going to be a? Well,
the goal of that hui is to identify for the whole of the region where the actual gaps, where the gaps in support are. So if the Mid-Canterbury, if yourselves come together and you're like, we've identified that Carter's Creek is a gap, it's a big gap, we need support to go into that place, and collectively at the hui we all go, yep, we totally agree that's a gap. Then once that regional needs, well, that'll be included in the regional needs assessment. Of course, I'm talking hypothetically, I'm trying to build it on the scenario you've brought across here. The ministry has to sign off, has to respond back to our needs assessment within 10 working days. It's written into our contract. Once that's happened, our team are on the ground then. So they'd be going out, they'd be coming down, for example, and talking to the collective, to them.
One last question?
Yeah.
It all sounds great and things, but I'm always sceptical when we go to anything with the regional council in it, that we're just a small population. We have one representative on the regional council, effectively from this district.
Right.
So we get up there and we get swallowed up by. I looked through some of the things, the Avon River restoration and some of those sort of things. Will we just get shunted down the chain, or will we have is it a regional based thing where you sort of spread it around, or is it just on population?
It's regional, and we're spread around, and we have we will not be working within Otatahi Christchurch within the urban region. There is plenty of support and there's no gaps within that space. So in that sense, you wouldn't disappear into that. And we are taking the whole region kind of as a whole. And I guess just from the work we've done since I did my first presentation back in June, we're kind of starting to build our own understanding of where the gaps are. And we're potentially thinking, you know, the hill and high country could be a potential spot where there's quite a lot of gaps. Maybe banks, like areas of the Banks Peninsula could be somewhere there's gaps. But this is just from our conversations. Really, we need to hear from yourselves. And we've got like maps and things up, and it's like, this is a gap, that is a gap. And then us being able to understand from there.
Thanks, Jess, for your presentation. So you've listened to what's going on in Carter's Creek. We've got a gap.
Yep.
So how can you now help us to fix that problem physically?
Me personally?
Well, your yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love it if we had all of that in Canterbury. So that money's across the whole. That's a national supported programme. If Carter's Creek was a gap, and if that was where we were going to go and engage with, I wouldn't be going out because I would be sending one of my two wonderful new sub-regional coordinators out. And I guess from the grant, the first conversation would be sitting down with them and identifying where the gaps are. What I've seen, and as was raised before, the gap there is engagement with the upper area of the catchment. So I'd look to seeing if we could support other ways of doing that. It could be through community events. Again, I'm just trying to really think off the top of my head.
I think we really know what the problems are.
Yeah.
And we're going to get them all written down, exactly what needs to be done. It's cash.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I really agree with you.
So having hui's and what have you, we need less hui, more dewey.
Yeah.
And I hear that often in the trips, and normally iwi are saying it.
Well, this...
so that's what we need, the cash, not more people on the ground doing studies, actual physical work.
Yeah, this hui, from my perspective, should be the one and the only to identify where our gaps are. And from then, we're not going to be caught up in hui's anymore. They'll be out on the ground and doing stuff and supporting the groups. If it is funding that they're looking for, looking for those alternative places they could go for funding, looking for the extra things that they tick the boxes of that they might be able to get funding to be able to support them doing that. I totally agree with you. There's so much conversation and not enough doing. So we want to get our people out.
And we'll know what success looks like when Carter's Creek doesn't flood and it has good water quality.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, hi. Thanks for your presentation, Jess. Yes, that's probably about the fourth time I've heard it. So just for a bit of context, in terms of working directly with catchment groups, there's been a bit of pushback on this across the South Island. And from the outset, that's not an EOS ecology pushback. It's probably gone back to the Ministry for the Environment.
Yes.
So Mid-Canterbury Catchment Collective were co-signers in a letter to Alice Bradley, who's a principal advisor at MFE, co-signed with Catchment Collective South Canterbury, Pomahaka Watercare Group, Otago Catchment Community, Thriving Southland, Huranui District Landcare Group and the Wanaka Catchment Group, so some really big catchment players across the South Island. The pushback was that just the manner in which this has been rolled out, it hasn't felt collaborative, it's felt very top-down, it hasn't felt inclusive. It feels like there's, considerable risk of duplication with limited consultation, not because you guys weren't trying, absolutely not the case.
Yep.
And I'd just like to just sit with the regional hui, up until relatively recently, the regional hui was not going to include catchment groups, was the understanding. I mean, it is now, but...
Not groups. It's not going to include catchment groups.
But catchment, people that are working in catchment context. I feels like another organisation that's talking about us rather than talking to us with this bottom-up, catchment focus that we're doing. In the room, there will be Ngāi Tahu and Runanga and ECAN and MFE and DOC and New Zealand Landcare Trust. And we get talked at, not with. And I think that the duplication, the concerns, we've made so much momentum on the ground, we have so much knowledge, we're organised, we're empowered, we have strategies and approaches, we know where the priorities are. So for some of those huis, just to our mayor's point, we've got to be really careful about it, this considerable amount of money that's being invested, that it doesn't cut across some already quite functional work.
Yeah.
And we'll come along to the hui, be very interested, but there's about another 10 catchment collective type groups that, would need to be invited. That invitation would need to be extended wider so that the catchment groups themselves, communities, call them what you want, feel like they have an opportunity to help shape and influence some of the direction of this considerable piece of work, which I understand is going to last for 2 years. So that's a lot that has to be achieved in a short space of time. And my understanding too is that you're 2 or 3, 4 months into it already. Yeah. So some challenges ahead.
Well, thanks very much, Jessica. It's an interesting project when you talk to groups and you see figures like 18 and 20 million. Seems a lot of money. And a lot of that seems to be in administration, doesn't it?
Well, it's one of the greatest people to be able to be out and on the ground and doing stuff. Administration
But
seems
people
to...
are out there doing stuff now. We'll watch with interest, but good luck. And keep in touch with Angela, who runs the Catchment Collective in this region, which has been very successful.
Very successful, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Kia ora.
We'll move to the funding application, page 33. There's nothing.
Thank you.
Do you want to talk to the state? Please.
Okay, so we're now talking about the Aotearoa Ashburton Lakes Catchment Group application for funding for $10,000 for nitrate sensor for doing monitoring work in that area. They've put in a funding request which is attached. There was also some questions raised by some members of the Zone Committee, and there's some answers to those questions in the document. I have also asked for some input from Ecan Science people who have come back with some questions too in terms of the type of sensor and maybe how it will be implemented. So it might be useful to have some collaboration happening between those two to make sure we get the right solutions. Also on board online we have Judith Earl-Galay, who's with the working group, and Otawhaukai, who may want to comment as well.
So what's the, any feedback from the committee about this application?
I'm supportive of it as it is, but there's some other questions raised. I think they've probably answered them, but God knows. It came round by email to support it, and it raised a couple of questions from Sydney and whatever. So, yeah.
Jude is online. Did you want to comment, Jude?
Oh yeah, kia ora. Look, I think just from Environment Canterbury's point of view, we're really happy to see that the landowners up there are interested in monitoring the effects of their activities on water quality. I guess the challenge is if there's questions about is it the right bit of kit to do that job is the challenge given the money, and that's where the science advice was coming in. But you know, any time we have more monitoring, more information and insight is useful. And obviously you've all heard the amount of uptake and increased monitoring that's already been invested in the last 2 years in this catchment anyway. We've covered the breadth of that several times. But yeah, so if landowners want to you know, have resources and tools to help them understand their impacts better, then great.
If I can just add to that, Judith, it was the group up there. I've had a look at where Ecan is doing their monitoring, and it is very limited. They're doing monitoring out in the middle of lakes. They're doing 1 or 2 streams and various, but where the farmers are doing, they want to go out there and do it much more regularly to start telling a story so that they can go and identify where the problems are. And yes, it is just one indicator, being nitrate, but at least they can go and focus and know that there's something happening in that part of the catchment, that part of the stream, and become that they're a results-focused team. So, and then if they need to do some more comprehensive testing, well, at least they know where to go to test other elements. So that's why I was very supportive of the whole process. They're engaged, so you've got to build on enthusiasm when it's there, and I think it ticks the boxes as far as being a priority for us as a zone committee in that area.
Yeah, if this machine is purchased and the monitoring is done, it's a question for Judith, and the results coming out of it, will they be accepted by Ecan and reputable results from this machine?
So that was some of the question around the nature of the machine there, and is it the best type of machine? I don't have that technical info, so the conversation, I think there was some work with Tina from the Water Quality Science. She's presented to this committee before about what might work, so maybe there's a little bit to explore that, because you do want good quality information to inform practices and behaviour, and it would be any information is information that's available for use. Yeah.
I have an instance of some monitoring that was done some years ago, which was good information but totally disregarded because it wasn't collected in a scientific manner, so it was discarded, and we don't want that to happen again by the wrong machine. Yeah.
Well, and I guess that's the understanding the what then, you know, getting a probe and sticking it in some water and having a result. I guess it is understanding the how it needs to be collected to balance out any concerns. Obviously, Environment Canterbury has a background of staff that do that all the time as their core job, so and QA to a standard. But, you know, there are increasingly other agencies that are also doing that sort of monitoring. So we're happy to support that conversation about, you know, what does a good sampling regime practice look like? Yeah.
Good. No, thanks for that. It's helpful.
If I draw everybody's attention back to HH Wet, their presentation they put forward earlier, where we've got a groundwater project with 100 samples, and then another one that ECAN just does, it's got 13. And I'm just concerned that we provide the gear, which is great, but I've reinforced what the Mayor has put forward, that we need to have a buy-in or a guarantee from ECAN that the data that's collected has been collected right. And it's almost an oversight from ECAN to make sure that the data is collected and is done right, so that the data is not corrupted or not just brushed aside in the rush to have data. Because, you know, is there something there? I'll ask the question.
I've worked with these sensors before, and I understand that they are some of the best ones that are available in New Zealand, and have had, like, they're on Lincoln Uni Dairy Farm, and we have some on our farms as well. And yeah, not saying ECAN will accept it, but I'm not sure there's better options. Yeah.
Yeah, just to the point that Neil made. So each time a catchment group starts or develops a water monitoring program, or whatever it looks like, in the past we've ensured that we've collaborated really closely with ECAN to avoid the challenge that Neil touched on. So we've had Shirley Haywood, sometimes Shirley and Kimberly, come and talk to the catchment groups and talk through the protocols, the QA, QC, standard operating procedures. All of that's locked and loaded in the checks and balances that can be done, and the auditing that can also be done if required. So when I go back to the HH Wet, the learning we can take from since 2016 or however long they've been doing the monitoring, they're sharing all of that knowledge, because nobody wants to invest a whole lot of money and do a whole lot of work and find out it's going to fall over at the finish line. So, and ECAN have been very supportive of that.
Probably the most important bit is the words I used earlier on. It takes you to where you think there's a problem, and then you go and do a different sort of testing, but you can't go to where you think there's a problem without knowing, because it might only be there for so many months of the year. So the more testing you can do to start going to where the problem is, will actually start taking to a real problem.
Adi?
Yeah. Personally, I think we had some questions and we did receive answers to all of them. I do wonder about item 4 that says, despite a number of requests through the working group or an official group, not sure what are those, for the balance of the sealed core samples from the Lake 380 project, to date this information has not been forthcoming. Is it something we could help out with?
Well, I think talking about all this, everyone's saying that we've got to communicate with ECAN. So I think when we circulated this, everyone in principle was in favour of it. They did have points, Sydney's one about, but different sort of testing and those sort of things. So I think what we need to work out is if we support it, that it is getting the right backing, and which Andrew's inferring that was the case. I've got a question from, who's that? Jude. Oh, Jude, please.
Kia ora, I'm just trying to figure out how to put my hand down again. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Look, just regarding the comment that was made around the, so this relates to some, I think it's lakes. I always say 360, but I think it's 380. I get a bit confused with my geometry. Project is, look, everything costs money. It's what's the priority, etc. One of the things we have got happening with the working group going forward is the pulling together of this integrated catchment management plans, and that will also identify where additional work investment and research or knowledge or understanding could occur, and that would be one of those we carry through. But I mean, I think you all can appreciate from your experiences that, you know, there's a bit where you can keep doing more and more and more, but actually the purse is dry at the moment. So we can come back to that. We will be capturing that information in that integrated plans as a kind of a opportunity of a way forward, and prioritising it about where we do need to fill in knowledge. And we being not just ECAN there, but also the other agencies in the working group. So just wanted a visibility on that. Yeah.
Richard, do you want to go?
We've just had an offer of some money to provide people on the ground in the Waitoa Trust. So that it's amazing how things match together nicely. And we provided some nutrient monitoring equipment and they provided the people, we'd actually have a great outcome. So sometimes things do fall together if the right people will listen.
Thanks, in wild agreement.
I think, as you say, if you carry on from Richard's point, also the farmers or the groups out there are prepared to do the work, and if we provide the equipment, which we've done to other groups, I think if it's used properly, as everyone said, I think I'd personally be in favour of it. Yeah.
I just having talked to the science people, I know they're really keen to work with the group and provide any advice or whatever to help. So if they together build a solution and we fund it, then it seems pretty straightforward.
So how should we move that?
Support, recommend zone committee would recommend the funding of $10,000 for a nitrate sensor, and encourage the catchment group to work with Environment Canterbury in the design.
Design team to design the appropriate protocol.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. Can you cobble something from that?
Yeah, I just lost it a bit at the end there. Chris was, what did you
Co-design.
Oh,
Co-design.
There was co-design for potentially the appropriate methodology for what's used.
So the information will be relevant, I suppose. Presented to her. Yeah. So it's been moved by Chris, seconded by Claire. Is all in favour? Aye. What about the two online? Are they?
Yes, I feel my questions have been answered. Thank you, Jude. Yep.
Thank you.
In favour.
Thank you. And Artie's good? Where's Artie?
Yep.
Great. Okay, well, thanks very much for that, and it's a good result. Carried. Right. Come on, everyone. There's been a few.
The last thing's just my facilitator's report. We can get through this pretty quickly. ECAN proposing to run some Treaty of Waitangi workshops for zone committee members. Traditionally, we've kind of combined them with other zone committees, but that does mean a lot of travel and time and stuff for people. So we could look at holding something in Ashburton, just getting a bit of a gauge really on where and when people think it would be good to have those. And we could probably, if we haven't got big numbers, we could probably extend the treaty course to others. But just conscious that there's perhaps some new zone committee members or people that haven't had the training, or if you have had it, welcome to do it again.
Do we have any refresh this year?
Refresh is next year.
Oh, next year, so it's a year off.
Yeah, so next year we will have, I was looking into it, Bill asked me to look into it, Artie, Claire, Angela, Sydney and Chris. Bill and Jen are 2025, but you can reapply to come back on, so that's just for your info. And the other thing related to that is that Bill is looking to not stand for chair again, which will probably have an election in September or October. So get your thinking caps on about that one as well. Yeah. So back to the treaty. Angie's got your...
Well, the treaty one I would have thought might be a good time when the new committee's formed.
Right. It's another
No,
year.
and just quickly at this stage, so we've booked a treaty. I did mention a wee while ago that MCCC were looking at securing a date, so we've managed to lock something in with Sharon, who's the same facilitator or coordinator. So it's booked for the 30th of October. The 2-day, we've gone for the 1-day option, so that will be here. We haven't secured a venue, so we've only just managed to lock that in, but as soon as we get a venue, and Aware will circulate some invites. I think it's minimum 12, maximum 20. So we'll look at filling it up from MCCC with our facilitators and people first and foremost, but then extend it to zone.
So in effect, ECAN providing training for zone committees might not be needed here really if what you're saying, zone committee members could go on the MCCC one?
Unless somebody had a particular reason that they wanted to do a 2-day one rather than a 1-day workshop. But I do know that Sharon's struggling with capacity, so that's, we squeezed in, put it that way, yeah.
So another option might be to see if we can get into one of the other zone committee training sessions, maybe in Selwyn or, so what day?
Oh, the 2-day central zones treaty training is the 3rd and 4th of October.
Okay, so that's another option, or further south, yeah. Okay,
We'll circulate that, will you? And,
yep, we'll look into that.
right, what's next?
Cool. Just an update there that Bill presented to Environment Canterbury, the progress report, which was well received. And there's a link there to the document if you want to look at that. And action plan. We were going to look at reviewing our action plan towards the end of last financial year, and we ran out of time to do that. Just wanted to get some idea from you whether you have an appetite to do that. It's not a complete review, it's kind of just looking at, are there any things we want to tweak in terms of our priorities and our action plan? Or do we stick with what we've got there through to the end of next year? If you do want to do it, then we'll probably have a workshop on that fairly soon.
What have you completed and what needs to go on, really? It's, what can you take off because you've completed? Let's go to the top of the list. Or...
Maybe you could do those traffic light things, don't you, Dave? You could do a wee update for us, how we're going.
Yep, I could do that. Yep.
If there's a gap,
Yep.
we can look at it.
Okay, that's cool.
You'll be right.
Yep. That's about it.
Very good. Any other business or anything you want to bring up?
I'd like to know, off the back of the consent review on the Ashburton River, where are we at? Because it's an enormous piece of work that we've done. I still hear people talk about this river being over allocated X amount of 3 times, or all these different figures bandied around. I think we learnt that a lot of that was on paper only and not in actual. But when we're talking about our AWA and freshwater management units and everything else, the main river that flows through the town, I'd like to know what its current state is. Could we get an update on that at some stage, please?
I must declare a conflict in the
We'll get some people to come back and talk to a bit of a summary of what's happened with the review and the outcomes. I guess we're now in process in terms of the new conditions, so it's going to be interesting to see what the river levels look like over a period of time.
We'll do that for the October meeting, do you think?
Yeah, we should be able to do that for October. Yep.
Don't be surprised if the minimum flows don't actually change on the Ashburton River for the summer. Sorry, don't be surprised if there's no change in the minimum flows over the middle of summer, where it might go below 3 cubics. The paperwork's not going to put more water back in the river.
Yeah, I just want to be able to alleviate the claims that it's abstraction that's causing it. But those are some of the discussions that we need to be able to have honest, real discussions, rather than, perception is that it's all about abstraction. You know what I mean? So I'd really like to be able to drill into some of that.
Well, obviously those consent holders have had new consents with less water and less use, so because abstraction should have been less. But the river won't be at 6 cubics and at 10 cubics in 2020 and 2030, is it? So I mean, those targets need to be addressed because they're not.
Surely, if a 1 cubic was not taken out of the river and it's been hid underground deep wells instead of, and the scientists should have pointed towards that, then that water should be in the river and should be measurable.
Should be. So
otherwise, the science wasn't correct.
Yeah. Oh. Thanks for that, Neil.
I guess one point to add to that is that we're not going to see in one season. It's going to be over a period of time before we really see, I think. Yeah.
It's a big issue for going forward because they're doing these consents of everyone.
You need to light on, Bill.
I really don't want to be just
finished.
Close the meeting. We'll get Dave to close the meeting. Thank you.
one last item. I did go and listen to Tom from the Forest and Bird speaker talking about the rivers. I had a good conversation with Nikki and Tom for well over an hour and a half up at Ashburton Forks. Commented on our culvert by the road, Mr. Mayor. We looked at the rivers, and I described to him that rivers, when they're flooding, need to be able to flow out in a managed way out through the trees, and where it slows the velocity down, we know where it's going. We don't impede its flows by putting sheds and various things in its way. So, but I said, he actually totally agreed with me. But I said it would be really helpful if Forest and Bird stopped talking about letting the rivers breathe, and you want farmers to retire the lands, they want to do it. But I said if you're talking about letting the water, to slowing the velocity down so it does less damage, you know where it's going to go, where it's not going to do damage to infrastructure and da-da-da. I said that's a completely different conversation, and you'll engage more people in it. And I didn't get any pushback to that statement, so it'd be quite interesting what he was saying. But we were talking the same language. It was just how extreme you push that, but we agreed we actually need to have river management plans and know what the riverbed levels are going to do, and just putting flood banks out to the side is not a solution. It's only a temporary fix for a certain period of time. So I just thought I'd report that Jen gave us all a motivational talk on an email that we should have all gone to it, but they came out and had a chat.
Oh,
so
nice.
I just thought I'd better acknowledge that.
Us at the bottom of the river would like you to keep the floodwater up your end.
We can do that, but when it comes down, it'll just come back down a bit deeper, okay?
Okay, Dave.
So I'll close with a karakia. Unihia, unihia, unihia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara tangata. Koia rā e rongo, whakearia, aki ki wunga, kia tina, tina, hauie, tai kia.
Thanks,